Chapter 370. Oh, this wild and unruly fellow. Luo Nin didn't go so far as to consider himself a god. He wouldn't lose his bearings just because of a few words from Baze. The light of the heart lantern of the eye's orifice pointed directly at Baze's essence. Luo Nin naturally used the division technique he had just learned from Gym Master Xiao. Yes, there was also the relevant information that Fairchild had told him before he left. Luo Nin had a general judgment of Baze. This fellow pursued power without end. There was only power in his eyes. He didn't care about being restricted at all, especially when it came to the so-called gods, doctrines, and other illusory matters. The root receptacle could be remolded. The root nature could be controlled. The root trigger was appropriate. It seemed like it could be done. What Luo Nin lacked the most right now was observation and verification. His thoughts spun in a circle, and the beam of light from the heart lantern of the eye's orifice dropped down, piercing between Baze's eyebrows. It was at this moment that Luo Nin realized with horror that the sound of chains under the living starry sky grew clearer. The incorporeal and boundless power merged with the beam of light from the heart lantern of the eye's orifice. It ignored the distance between space and itself as it pierced into Baze's body. The interference power of the heart lantern was not worth mentioning in front of a powerful B rank. However, the marvelous power of distortion it carried was instantly displayed on Baze's body. Baze's reaction was huge. His cheeks contorted, and the muscles of his body violently twitched. Even so, Baze opened his mouth to reveal an ugly and unbridled smile. Bang! The hard bed beneath Baze inexplicably split open. Dust flew everywhere. He stood up and landed on the ground. He staggered a bit, but he still maintained a posture of stretching out his arms and raising his head. He looked more like a fanatic than anyone else. In reality, this fellow was just excited. He only believed in power that belonged to him. Baze's foundation had been corroded by the chaos element, and he had been repeatedly tortured by the half-baked rule that Luo Nin had given him. He was at the weakest point of his life. His internal organs, muscles, bones, skin, and flesh were only in shape. His functions were scattered. But under the illumination of the heart lantern of the eye's orifice, the marvelous power of distortion of the living starry sky poured in. The power of distortion represented some sort of hidden and powerful rule of order. Baze didn't lack anything. He just lacked a power of order that could integrate the functions of his chaotic body. So he celebrated the internalization of the rule. The rule itself was a set of chains and fences that were difficult to break free from. As long as there was power, anything was possible. To others, this sort of order and rules was a prison, but to Baze, it was the toughest backbone. It was the foundation and guarantee that he could achieve his goals. Baze staggered 2 or 3 steps before he managed to steady himself. His eyes were ferocious and glowed with a green light. After holding back for more than 20 days, this guy was like a hungry beast looking for food in the wilderness. His hunting ground was the big city outside. In the next moment, the iron door of the quiet room, along with the door frame, was kicked off the wall and flipped over. The members of the Order of Justice, who were responsible for taking care of him and monitoring him in passing, were all dumbstruck. Baze strode forward and raised his hands high at the same time. He shouted at the ceiling, or at the higher realms, in a pious and crazed manner. "Praise you!" Evidently, he was quite satisfied with the formless yet powerful rules of order. He felt that the power he had gathered at his current stage was worth the price he paid. The Order of Justice of Xia City was undoubtedly at its weakest right now. After Baze reconstructed the frame of his soul, he recovered most of his strength to its peak state. Even First Ablatum Zheng Xiao, who was temporarily in charge of the Order of Justice, didn't have the guts to stop him. He could only let Baze swagger away. It seemed like he had done something wrong. Luo Nin watched Baze laugh loudly as he walked out. He felt an inexplicable sense of guilt. He shook his head, leaving a portion of his mind as a precaution. Then he continued his journey of clairvoyance with the heart's lantern. In the end, a weirdo like Baze was just an exception. The sky gradually darkened, and the night world of Xia City was rapidly recovering its vitality. In a dimly lit alleyway, a drunk woman was yelling in a language that no one could understand. She tore off her denim jacket and covered her forehead with it. She tried to block the invisible beam of light, to block the binding that came at the same time that terrified her even more. Of course, everything was futile. The drunk woman cursed loudly. She poured the remaining alcohol in the bottle onto her head. The alcohol flowed down her hair and dripped on her tender shoulders, soaking her sexy, tight-fitting chest. This sort of action was unable to sober her up. The drunk woman staggered out of the alleyway, but she ran into a few mischievous hoodlums. In the next moment, the empty bottle of alcohol exploded on the heads of this group of blind fools. Luo Nan smiled wryly, and the heart's lantern spun once more. This time, the heart's lantern moved over 100 kilometers away. It was already outside the main city district of Xia City. The beam of light from the heart's lantern descended, and the specter that was shuttling through the void suddenly came to a stop. The heavily chained crow that was pulled out from the depths of the mental plane collapsed, but the incorporeal binding and pressure that followed caused the specter to instinctively tremble all the more. For a time, it didn't budge no matter how the person in charge of grazing urged it. The heart's lantern illuminated them one by one, and Luo Nan saw ink let out a coarse squawk. It ignored the restlessness of its own kind and the curses of the residents. It flew up and circled in the night sky. Luo Nan also saw Xie Junping, who was at a certain religious site. He raised his head to look all around, but he was at a loss. There was also another person. Her slender body lay quietly on a sickbed. Her eyelids moved slightly, but she never opened them. Correspondingly, a lone star that had been hidden for a long time streaked across the living starry sky. It circled half a circle before fading away once more. Everything returned to tranquility. Luo Nan looked around, and the glow of the heart's lantern grew brighter. It reflected into his heart, causing Luo Nan to suddenly come to a realization. The living starry sky was warping, but he was actually quite familiar with the order that appeared within the warping. He was even more familiar with it than the multiple explanations of the spatial order of modern physics. He lowered his head to look at the notebook in his hand. There was the classic visualization diagram that he had just drawn. Of course, there was also the title page of his grandfather's notebook, the general outline of formatting theory. The structure of a tetrahedron, inscribed sphere and circumscribed sphere. If it weren't for this intuitive and concise diagram structure and the corresponding theory as a prerequisite, Luo Nan would probably have been lost within the bizarre laws of the living starry sky. But now he was very clear that the warping of the living starry sky was not some new toy. Instead, it was with him as the core. It was driven by him, warped by him, and divided into levels. The distance of the millions upon millions of life sketches was not calculated based on spatial distance. Instead, it was calculated based on their usefulness to him. They formed many levels, and they could be named student, employee, pilot, clergyman, politician. Yes, the intuitive structure of the star atlas format pyramid had melted away, but it was seamlessly integrated into the structure of the living starry sky. Its rules were no longer like geometric diagrams. After undergoing a high level of generalization, they appeared simple and intuitive. Instead, they were hidden deep within the living starry sky, appearing in an objective and subtle form. Perhaps Luo Nan was just a naive and clumsy student when faced with the boundless and majestic living starry sky, but he had long since obtained a standard answer. Chapter 371. Once again, Luo Nan discovered that his train of thought had run too far. What he wanted to do at first was just to observe the heavily chained crow. But who would have thought that this toy would undergo a phaseless transformation the moment he made contact with it? It transformed into an incorporeal power that enveloped the living starry sky. It naturally guided him to the level of my heart's a prison. The range expanded in an instant, and the relevant connections became even more complicated. Most people would not be able to separate themselves. Looking at the effects of the self format on the living starry sky, how could one clearly distinguish between inside and outside? Right now, only the core of the dense cluster of stars still maintain the outline of the self format. It could correspond with the classical visualization diagram. As for the societal format, the tetrahedron was already old news. This toy could be said to encompass the entire living starry sky. In any case, from the concept of formatting theory, the societal format was centered around the self. It formed a social structure that could be used by the self. There was no problem with this judgment, given the strength of the current distortion of the living starry sky. Just these 2 points encompassed everything that Luo Nen could currently observe with clairvoyance. Even so, there was still no place for the heaven and earth format. If Luo Nan still wanted to observe the heavily chained crow in this situation, he would be under the suspicion of not turning back until he hit a brick wall. Luo Nan pondered that he could set a slightly broader target for his observation. He still remembered that half a month ago, he had received Jim Master Shio's guidance in the Daoguan. He had entered a deep meditative state and had seen the internal structure of the self format. He only remembered that the chains were crisscrossing, dense like a spider web, mysterious and unfathomable. Would such a situation change after the heavily chained crow mutated and became illusory? Luo Nan was even more afraid that he would do something else with this thought. He no longer hesitated, and the light of the heart lantern changed direction. This time, his telepathic thoughts successfully penetrated the dense cluster of stars. They collided head-on with a brilliant and powerful light that was like the radiance of a myriad of stars. Fortunately, such a powerful light only flashed on the mental plane. The heart lantern of the eye's orifice swayed slightly, automatically adjusting its interference strength and changing the coupling method. This wave of powerful light dissipated into nothingness. Luo Nen had once heard Jim Master Shio say that the heart lantern of the eye's orifice was the first of the 9 orifices and 6 roots in the act of introspection. After all, everyone was used to using their eyes to observe. Viewing the scenery and taking images was the most suitable habit, especially since Luo Nan had mixed in the marvelous coupling effect. The mental plane and the material plane interfered effectively. It was like a gentle breeze and faint light. No matter how deep and indistinct the land was, it could be seen. It could be touched. The corresponding information was much more abundant. Through the effective integration of the consciousness, Luo Nan felt as if he was immersed in the scene. At this moment, it was as if Luo Nan had crashed into the center of a galaxy. It was as if he was surrounded by the twinkling stars of a high-density stellar group. It seemed to be near yet far, and it surrounded him from all directions. On the other hand, it was like he'd encountered an enormous black hole at the forefront of his thoughts. It was dark and deep, and it intended to completely swallow his mind. It was indeed different from the last deep meditation experience. Luo Nan's mind went straight to the depths of the black hole. The heart lantern of the eye's orifice pierced through the gloom, illuminating the deep space below. Wow, it's not easy. Luo Nan was a bit surprised. The clairvoyant scene before his eyes overlapped with the scene in his memories to a large extent. Formatting theory's star Atlas transformation was so intense, but the core area of the self-format still maintained its basic structure. It manifested as a bottomless pit of deep space. Endless dark chains crisscrossed and weaved together, forming a complex and dense structure. Of course, the details had changed quite a bit. The last time Luo Nan's thoughts entered, the space was dark and misty. It was as if it were a black prison constructed by a demonic god. All hope was trapped, and it possessed an unshakable dignity of deep silence. Back then, he had gathered all the vital energy in his body with great difficulty. He had wanted to feed the soul flame in the depths of the prison, but it had been sucked dry by the great net of chains. In the end, only a few pitiful strands remained, and they trickled down. This was why Jim Master Shio commented that Luo Nen couldn't use his skills on himself. Jim Master Shio even said that Luo Nen could absorb external techniques. This was what Jim Mastershow meant. However, many days had passed, and the situation was vastly different. Luo Nan had built his foundation through internal refinement. He had achieved success in the eye's orifice, and he had comprehended the coupling technique. The god gear and body gear meshed and revolved, and the interference between the mental and material planes deepened layer by layer. Every step of progress was clear and real. Luo Nin could see that the stability of the deep space seemed to be wavering a bit. From time to time, subtle explosions would transmit through, causing the tens of thousands of chains to rattle. Upon closer inspection, one could see some structural changes and reorganization. If one were to insist on saying that these unforeseen events were affected by the Star Atlas transformation, then it would be very hard to find a similar explanation for the increase in brightness and temperature of the deep black prison. The heart lantern of the eye's orifice took a look within itself. Luo Nan's thoughts did not need to dive too deep. He could clearly see the halo of light at the bottom layer through the many layers of chain structure. There was also a bit of heat that rose up, closely intersecting with the vital energy that constantly seeped in. Looking down a bit further, the soul flame could be seen within the net of chains. It was extremely lively, especially when the beam of light from the heart lantern fell down. The energies of the two sides connected, and the soul flame became a bit crazed. It exploded and ignited, and the tail of flame soared. It broke through the lowest layer of the net of chains and was about to burn to the middle section. Luo Nin could vaguely see that the lowest layer of chains had broken. Half of the chain hung down from the tightly woven net of chains. It lay low by the side of the soul flame, receiving an even more intense calcination. There was a great sign of mutation. Wonderful, truly wonderful. Luo Nin already had a general confirmation. If the Star Atlas transformation of the format pyramid was said to be the embodiment of formatting theory's external influence and method of use, then this black prison was the embodiment of his level of control and manipulation over formatting theory. In the past, he could only be said to be a user of formatting theory. He was like a driver, a jailer. He had to act strictly according to the rules drawn by formatting theory. But the current situation was clearly reflected. No matter what sort of changes the Star Atlas transformation of the format pyramid brought, formatting theory, this external technique, was suppressing Luo Nan's core strength. It was shaking, and Luo Nan began to obtain more and more autonomy. His progress was without a doubt. Luo Nan couldn't help but let his imagination run wild. What would happen if the soul flame completely covered this dark prison, completely incinerating these thousands upon thousands of dark chains? What sort of situation would that be? Luo Nan let out a long breath. He felt that he had gained a great deal, so he temporarily stopped his internal clairvoyance. He drew a perfect end to today's closed-door training. It was already late. His aunt and uncle would probably be back soon. It would not be good to hole up in his room any longer. Luo Nan's body fell back, and he stretched his back on the bed. He moved his muscles and bones a bit, relieving the strain of sitting for a long time. But a certain feeling collided with his mind just as he unfolded his arms. It caused his body to freeze on the spot. His soul strength seemed to have grown again. It was explosive. Chapter 372. What the hell? Luo Nan really did jump out of bed. His head instantly swelled up. This didn't make sense. He didn't have an out-of-body state. He didn't sense the wraith sign hunting. He didn't do anything else. Fine, he did quite a few things. But what do these things have to do with the explosive increase in soul strength? He immediately restrained his thoughts and returned to a more realistic plane. He observed the coupling of the god and body gears. The water level of the vast iceberg ocean continued to rise. It showed no signs of stopping. He had already jumped out of the mental plane. Was it still not over? Could it be that the My Heart's a Prison mode created vampires? Why? Fine. Why again? Luo Nan calmed his mind and tossed aside the relevant questions. He helplessly returned to the mental plane. He concentrated his mind and searched for the crux of the problem. The formatting theory system had completely merged with the living starry sky. Luo Nan also knew the standard answer in advance. He understood the relevant operating principles. Many things appeared especially intuitive. Without the tangible chains, the formatting theory system that covered the starry sky turned into an incorporeal prison. Luo Nan changed the locking mode of the chains, but the prison was simply wiped out in one go. Under the constraints of the incorporeal laws, the various living beings under the starry sky more or less reacted to Luo Nan. The vast majority of them had relatively small effects, but they could accumulate and naturally form a scale. Looking at it from this angle, Luo Nan suddenly had a hypothesis. It was just a hypothesis. The reason for the uncontrollable growth of soul strength. From the current state of the living starry sky, a complete formatting theory system was not just Luo Nan's single-person mode. It encompassed the vast structure of all living beings within the range of his perception. It was like a planetary system. Luo Nan was the sun at the center of the system. He possessed the greatest mass. He formed a gravitational force that attracted the other celestial bodies in the vast starry sky to revolve around him. A few of his believers interacted with him to a deeper degree. They were the planets, asteroids, comets, and so on of the system. The vast majority of people interacted with him to a very shallow degree. They were far away from him. They didn't even belong to this star system, but they more or less had a connection with him. If it was just a planetary system, then so be it. But there were many more links in the interaction between people. Using coupling theory to explain, the formatting theory system was composed of many gears, big and small, inside and outside, pieced together. Under the strict system of principles, they were all one, forming an exquisite internal structure. Each level, each rank, each group, each distinction. They interlocked with each other to form an exquisite transmission. In the end, all rivers converged to the core of the formatting theory system, which was Luo Nan's body. On a deeper level, the mode where multiple gears and gear sets worked together was like a gigantic machine that distorted the void. With it as the core, energy and raw materials were collected from various levels, and with that as the foundation, more and more soul power was produced. The function of this production line was too powerful, and there was no limit to it. It continued to produce until there was a relative overcapacity and an economic crisis occurred. Right now, Luo Nan was facing a crisis of relative excess. Wasn't it good to have more soul energy? Of course it was good, but please give him the physique of an extraordinary first. Only then would he be able to completely digest and make use of it. What extraordinary physique! Of course, it was just wishful thinking, but since he didn't have it, it meant that he didn't have enough purchasing power. Even if he really needed it, he couldn't afford it. Even if they gritted their teeth and took out a loan to buy it, the long-term pressure of the interest would be enough to crush them. When production and consumption were out of balance, the crisis would naturally come. Luo Nan's brain began to go out of control at this point. He couldn't avoid letting his imagination run wild. He felt that he was like a factory owner who couldn't find a market, a clumsy capitalist. If the excess products could be dumped into a river or thrown into an incinerator like milk, he would gladly do it. The problem was that he couldn't even find a channel that could carry them. The void depository of the external neuron was once a deep lake, but now it was filled to the brim. As for a furnace that could incinerate soul power, it would be more refreshing to just admit that it was a hole in his brain. Luo then began to circle around the bed, but he couldn't completely shake off the influence of his brain. Of course, he didn't really want to find an incinerator. He just wanted to walk along the line of an economic crisis. With his newly acquired knowledge of mechanical design, he managed to come up with a strange idea. He should have intervened. A smart factory owner could completely change the function of the production line in a situation where he had sufficient capital. He could produce new products and open up new markets, even if he had to consume a bit more. TSK. It was said that he was purely observing, but in the end, he broke the rules again. But this idea that suddenly popped up was far too wonderful. He couldn't help but put in mental effort. He pondered over it. Actually, he didn't need to remodel the entire production line. He just needed to add one more link. He just needed to continuously consume the products of the work department. Burn and refine essence. This was Luo Nan's first thought. Jim Mastershow once said that this sort of refinement of essence into energy required the participation of the mind. In turn, it tempered the mind and increased its level. This was a refining process of soul power. But there were too many things to pay attention to in this course, especially when it was nearing completion. Jade gives birth to amethyst. Smoke was incessantly burned and refined from day to night. The essence had long since been boiled dry, and one would go berserk. Then what should he burn? Perhaps Luo Nan was affected by the hole in his brain that was the incinerator, but he was more interested in burning and refining. Suddenly, there was a muffled thud. Luo Nan kicked the lower edge of the large bed frame. He didn't care about the pain. He vented all his strength into smacking the bed. Burn and refine the external neuron. The so-called reversal of true energy used the body gear as the lead to drive the God gear. With the addition of interference effects, it could completely consume soul power. And looking at it from this angle, the body gear was like fire. The external neuron, which possessed the hollow depository, did not store soul power. It stored a lake of crude oil. Wouldn't it be possible to find something by setting a fire on it? Hold on. Only now did Luo Nan have the time to hiss in pain. He rubbed his toes. The pain brought him a sense of crisis. He had to admit that this idea was too rash. There were no actual phenomena or data to support it. A single mishap would lead to an unsalvageable situation. He needed to do a few experiments and gather some data before making a decision. After all, the external neuron was not a part of his body. No one knew what would happen if it was burned and refined for an extended period of time. In this way, the production line transformation could not be carried out for a while. It was more practical to pour milk. How could he waste it? Consume it? Luonin scratched his head. The pain in his toes had weakened a bit. He sat back on the bed and subconsciously flipped through his notebook. He wanted to find inspiration to solve this problem. But unfortunately, inspiration was a thing. It would always appear when there were too many restrictive conditions. In the end, it was hard for his imagination to solve practical problems. Chapter 373. His fingers paused, revealing 2 pieces of greenish-yellow paper sandwiched between the split pages of the notebook. They looked rough, but strangely glossy. This was a paper talisman given to him by Paper Cut. It was a top-quality product personally made by the famous psychic of the branch, Mr. Gao. Luo Nan used it to practice his soul strength activation techniques, strengthening the effects of his interference power. Last week at Ocean Sky Cloud City, the paper dolls he made had also made a contribution. Originally, this was a good method of pouring milk. Back then, Luo Nan had relied on this method to consume his excess soul strength and reduce the pressure on his body. But now that Luo Nan had comprehended the technique of coupling, the framework of the God gear and the body gear had taken shape. He no longer had a bottleneck in terms of interference power. He could use a fraction of his strength to achieve 100% of his previous effectiveness. He could stop using up energy. At present, he had not given up on this technique. He would always find time to practice it. Now, there were only 2 pieces of talisman paper left. There were more than 20 little paper men sandwiched between the 2 pieces of talisman paper. Little paper men fluttered in the air with a puff of air. They scattered on the bed and on the floor. But just as they touched the ground, they were like live monkeys. They grabbed the corners of Luo Nan's clothes and cuffs, fighting to be the first to jump back. Some simply climbed all the way to Luo Nan's head and shoulders, treating Luo Nan like a monkey mountain. What paper man? It was clearly a paper monkey. Luo Nan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He shook his shoulders and shook his head, removing the group of paper monkeys. The heart monkey technique that Paper Cut had imparted to him was still too troublesome. Later on, Luo Nan wanted to learn the equestrian technique for Paper Cut. It was said that it had the power of armored horses in novels. It could carry heavy loads and soar over land. It could be said to have a miraculous effect. Luo Nan's anxious mood was alleviated quite a bit with this. Previously, he was just depressed by the recurrence of his illness and lost his composure. Now that he thought about it, he had the foundation of the coupling technique and was no longer in a dilemma. So what if his soul power increased again? If opening the eye's orifice wasn't enough, he could open the mouth and tongue orifice. If that didn't work, he could open the ear's orifice, life orifice, and death orifice. Wouldn't it be balanced again? Patting his cheeks, he put away the paper monkeys and put them back into the book, taking the opportunity to organize his thoughts. In the end, he sent a message to Papercut through the Hexayear. Brother Papercut, do you have a big move for soul force activation? Big move? Papercut was chatting with someone in the tea house outside. He didn't react for a moment when he received the message. It's a very powerful move that consumes a lot of energy. Our method is like casting a spell, preparing a big move in advance. There's no need to panic. Papercut nearly choked when he heard Luo Nan's words. He apologized to the female friend across from him, got up, and went to a corner with no one around. He chuckled and responded, "My dear boss Luo, if I had such a big move, I would have dared to rush to be ranked today. Do you believe me?" Luo Nan was a bit disappointed. Then there's nothing else. Let's not talk about whether or not such a move exists. The key is that there's a limit to how much the talisman paper can hold. Old Gao's paper talismans were the best of the best in the vicinity of Xia City, but when the interference force was increased to a certain degree, it would spontaneously combust. Therefore, activation style like me has a life of support. I live my days on the spot. Boss Luo, you have the strength but nowhere to use it. You can switch to the control style. You have the talent for it. Papercut had an extremely good temperament. Even though Luo Nan had disturbed his date, he was very patient. He gave Luo Nan an explanation and even gave a suggestion. I told you before that the society has specialized combat machines. They may not be comparable to the deep blue walkers in terms of both internal and external integration, but their power is still outstanding. Relying on your level of interference force after your epiphany, and then learning microcontrol and mechanical principles from old Jai, you can play with this toy to the fullest. Luo Nan grunted twice. Papercut thought that Luo Nan was moved and felt that it was a bit of a pity. After all, there weren't many people like Luo Nan who could cultivate the heart of the ape technique to spirituality in such a short amount of time. There were very few people interested in the activation style. Now that they lacked an up-and-coming talent, they inevitably became weaker. However, Papercut's mind was clear. He continued to laugh and said, "It just so happens that I have a flywheel arm in my collection. Although it hasn't been sharpened, it is the most basic of combat machines. If you want to get started, you can try it out. I'll bring it over when you have time." Okay, if Brother Papercut isn't busy, then next Monday is fine. Though Luo Nan said this, he wasn't really interested in switching to the control style. This was because this style always made him think of the Deep Blue Walkers. Plus, Papercut's words made it even more awkward. Plus, he didn't really need a big move to protect himself. He just wanted to find a channel to pour milk. Luo Nan was disappointed. He was just about to say a few more polite words and hang up when Papercut became concerned about his recent situation. Headquarters has been quite well behaved lately. It seems that Deputy Secretary General Gong ate some bad luck. He went into closed-door training when he got back. It's okay. The branch has taken good care of me. Then you suddenly want to hold back a big move. Hey, Miss Yuan, what are you doing? I'm sorry. Something urgent suddenly came up. I need to go take care of it. Let's talk later. Okay. Later. The beautiful Miss Yuan didn't even have the patience to listen to Papercut's words, even though she said they would talk later. She didn't even have the slightest intention of turning around. She swayed as she walked out of the tea house, quickly disappearing into the stream of people. She at least made a special trip to say something. Papercut sighed. He loosened his collar and walked back to his previous seat. He stretched and relaxed his body, and a smile appeared on his slightly plump face. Brother Papercut? Luo Nan couldn't see the situation over there, but he could feel that something not very harmonious had happened. Moreover, it was most likely related to his call. Am I bothering you? It's nothing. It's nothing. The more beautiful a girl is, the harder it is to coax her. Besides, I just saw that she was pretty. I harbored evil intentions. Where were we? Brother Papercut, since you have something to do, we can talk about it when we meet on Monday. I said it's nothing. Waiter, give me an extra plate of snacks. Papercut's tone was relaxed. He continued to chat with Luo Nan with a beaming smile. If you really feel guilty, then introduce me to a female student from Acumen College. She has to be over 20 years old. I'm afraid I'll turn into a beast if she's too young. Luo Nan stuttered a few times. Even he himself wasn't sure if he should agree or not. Papercut chewed on the snacks in his mouth as he spoke indistinctly. All right, let's talk about a big move. If you really want a big move, you don't need to look for it in the activation class. Open your mind. There are many things under the heavens that are suitable for you. For example, you can pay attention to an honor point mission from headquarters. The serial number is RT-8313. There might be a pleasant surprise there. Headquarters. Luo Nan was instinctively a bit afraid. Papercut could understand, so he eased Luo Nan's mind and said, the mission is hung in headquarters, but its roots are in our Xia city. You'll know when you see it. The Hexaear was able to completely achieve telepathic control in this sort of operation. A thought flashed through Luo Nan's mind as he and Papercut spoke, and the interface switched to the official mission release board of the Wilderness Explorer Society. Luo Nan locked onto the relevant information. Chapter 374. Luo Nan scratched his head in his bedroom. He felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity. Papercut laughed mischievously in the tea house. Do you see that? Her Majesty Empress Wu personally hung it up 3 years ago. The content is to collect Soul Force samples and analyze their basic properties and production principles. TSK, a big question. Luo Nan let out a sigh. No matter how big the hole in his brain was, he could only keep a respectful distance when encountering this sort of fundamental research that involved the essence of the problem. From this, one could see the foresight and boldness of an extraordinary. Right, 3 years ago, Her Majesty Empress Wu was not an extraordinary. However, Luo Nan didn't understand. What does this have to do with a big move? This is where Her Majesty the Martial Empress is awesome. She wanted to collect the soul force data of the entire world's ability users. Just like collecting fingerprints and DNA information, it was more or less a taboo. Even if the point reward was generous, not many people were willing to do it in the beginning, so the progress was rather slow. Later, she came up with an idea. You can look at Attachment 2, the payment agreement for information collection. Luo Nan didn't act according to Papercut's intentions. The familiar feeling grew more and more intense. He couldn't help but think hard. Where in the world have I heard this before? After all, his social circle was very narrow, and he didn't have many choices. Soon he slapped his thigh. The Martial Emperor's secret technique, subdue the world by force. Papercut laughed again. Aha, you also know that it was Bamboo Pole who taught you. Yes, I have a rough idea. Luo Nan had indeed heard about this matter from the notes on the major characters of the world course. As for why Luo Nan didn't think of Her Majesty Empress Wu for a time, it was because there were far too many marvelous deeds. Bamboo Pole, who taught the class, emphasized the description of many aspects of Luo Nan's character. Though this matter had a great impact, Bamboo Pole only spent a few minutes to explain it. He made the connection, the details, and so on. Then Bamboo Pole treated it as an extended assignment after class, letting Luo Nan do his own homework. Luo Nan was pressed for time, so he didn't really get involved. He passed it by mistake. At present, he only knew that in this event that shook the inner world, Her Majesty the Martial Empress had displayed her inconceivable boldness. On the mission issuance interface, she had publicly imparted an astonishing attack technique, which had instantly ignited the entire inner world. The current research on supernatural powers was still in its early stages, and some of the advanced research results had yet to be disseminated. Most of the ability users in this world were still in an instinctive state of ignorance about how to use their own abilities. Her Majesty Empress Wu grasped the minds of these people, publicizing a profound technique that was extremely suitable for the awakened level. Its allure instantly crushed most of the people's defenses. For a time, cultivating the Martial Emperor's secret technique became common practice. Not to mention the awakened, even the higher-level architects and transcendents practiced and researched it. From that moment on, Her Majesty Empress Wu's fame truly spread throughout the world. Papercut helped Luo Nin enrich the details. Her Majesty Empress Wu spent a large sum of money to build a special data collection network before the release of the Dripping Sword secret technique. She borrowed the East Wind and spent a mere 2 years to collect over 40,000 effective samples of ability users of all levels. There was a gap of a year in between. At the beginning of this year, she released a technique suitable for architects or B-rank power users. At present, the number of valid samples has not been calculated, but it should not be too little. I estimate that there should be at least 300 to 500 samples. The number of B-class experts might seem small, but considering the number of B-class experts, the ratio was quite high. This is the 3rd year. Her Majesty Empress Wu has already advanced to become an extraordinary. We are all guessing that this year or next year, it is very likely that she will bring out an even higher level technique. Oh, the extraordinary level. How magnanimous. Luo Nan had to admire her. Yeah. Although this sort of technique became a common commodity once it was released on the internet, it's still quite good to have a technique at your disposal. The more Papercut thought about it, the more reliable he felt it was. Next, he did his best to recommend. Her Majesty Empress Wu's technique is famous for being reliant on control. The same dripping sword can be used by one person to exterminate a powerful enemy, like slaughtering a dog, while the other person can't even kill a chicken. There are situations like this. Your spirit enhancement is in the precision direction. I am very confident in your control. Dripping Sword. Luonin finally opened attachment 2. He looked at the name of the technique displayed inside and muttered to himself for a time. You should learn it first. Her Majesty Empress Wu's techniques are more inclined towards the mental side. The requirements for the fleshly body aren't too high. It just so happens to suit you. I've learned the Dripping Sword. It really is out of the ordinary. At the very least, it has unexpected effects. As he spoke, Papercut sent over a file for the Hexier. Her Majesty Empress Wu personally wrote the lecture notes for last year's intermediate training class. It has to do with the Dripping Sword. The introduction is extremely detailed. There are also on-the-spot demonstrations during the lecture. This is a treatment that only our Xia City branch can enjoy. Even a year later, we can sell it for tens of thousands of dollars to the outside world. There are also notes I made. You could take a look. After all, my talent in this field is limited. Thank you, Brother Papercut. Luo Nin knew that these class notes were very secretive things. For Papercut to be able to take them out showed his trust in Luo Nin. Papercut didn't care. This is nothing. I've seen your recent progress. Secretary's arrangement of classes will involve this step as well. I'm just giving you special treatment ahead of time. Plus, I owe you a favor for the matter with old Jai. Worker Jai? Old Jai is a capable person, but his talent in cultivation is far too lacking. He is always a bit away from awakening, so he can't enjoy some resources. Him being your teacher can be counted in honor points. If you exchange it for resources, your chances of success will increase. It doesn't matter if you succeed or not. You can at least give him a bit of comfort. Luo Nin didn't agree with this, saying, you can't say it like that. Worker Jai gave me supplementary lessons. He taught me even more. I still need to thank you, Brother Papercut, for finding me such a good teacher. Tisk, it's so sour. Let's not flatter each other. I'll call old Jai out one day, and everyone can have a good meal. Okay. Luo Nin made a mental note of this. In this way, he would have 2 rounds with Papercut. It didn't matter, but introducing a female student. What a headache. Luo Nin's mind cleared up just as he was about to end the call. He had nearly forgotten his original intention of pouring milk. He mulled over Papercut's description of the Dripping Sword. It didn't seem like a high-energy consumption skill. Luo Nin hurriedly asked, what about the B-rank technique? Do you have the lecture notes? It's suitable for architects. It's called the Heart's Searing Blade. It's said to be extremely sharp, but I don't recommend that you come into contact with it right now. Papercut downed his already cold tea in one gulp. He began to earnestly lecture Luo Nin. Nanster, there are indeed quite a few people who view you as a B-rank power, but you're still lacking a bit, right? Take a look at the Dripping Sword first. This technique is extremely amazing. It also highlights the characteristics of Her Majesty Empress Wu's technique. If you feel that you can use it freely, then take a step further, okay? I know. I just want to gather some information in advance. Though Luo Nan said this, he still felt weak in his heart. Chapter 375. Sister Yuan? Luo Nan grew more and more diffident. This sort of action of biting off more than one could chew would most likely not receive Yuan's support. Papercut added, however, if it involves personal understanding and experience, it would be best to find someone who was present at the time of the lecture. It would be even better to impart the teachings of their hearts. There were only a few B-class experts in the branch, and even fewer in the spiritual type. Old Yu, Horned Demon, Old Gao, Mr. Bai. He read out a string of names. Luo Nin found the names familiar. Aren't these the psychics of Xia City? Old Man, Yu was one of the Iron Triangle of Xia City. He was known alongside Ouyang Chun and Her Majesty Empress Wu. The centaur was said to be an adventurous madman with a tendency to self-destruct. He wandered in the wilderness every day, looking for excitement. Old Gao was the creator of the paper talisman in Luo Nan's hand. He was a Taoist with an inheritance, and he was half a disciple of Old Yu. As for Mr. Bai, Luo Nan was even more familiar with him. They had fought side by side before, and Mr. Bai had even given Luo Nan a diagnosis and treatment. His daughter was Bai Xinyan, the mysterious medical doctor with a strange stance. He suddenly discovered that the psychics of Xia City were quite peculiar. Excluding Luo Nan, who was half a psychic, there were a total of 4 psychics. Perhaps the ratio wasn't high when compared to over 1,000 ability users, but all of them were of the architect rank. There were B-rank powerhouses. In the entire Xia City branch, how many powerhouses were there of B-rank or higher? There were a total of 14 people on record, which was already one of the best out of the 88 branches in the world. Among them, shamans accounted for nearly a third of them, which was very impressive. Luo Nan was a bit distracted, and Papercut pulled him back. I can help you ask Old Gao. It's just that this fellow is a bit unscrupulous. He might try to rip you off. Sweat, you used to have a large supply of talisman paper. How many of them were taken advantage of? Luo Nan suddenly felt that he really should find an opportunity to give thanks to the teachers who taught him his skills. Luo Nan didn't want Papercut to return to this matter. He thought for a bit and said, maybe we can look for Mr. Bai. The old man seemed to have a good temperament and character. He should be easier to talk to than the profiteer, Mr. Gao. That's right, you've been treated by white salt for such a long time, so it can be considered a bit of fate. He'll definitely pay attention to you. Just don't take the initiative to mention it. I know. Luo Nan understood tacitly. It wasn't news that the father and daughter of the Bai family didn't get along. Wait, why does it sound like you want me to find someone? Luo Nan opened his mouth, but he was speechless. It was his own business, so of course he had to do it himself. However, with his otaku personality, he would feel great pressure even if he took the initiative to contact someone, let alone ask for help. After all, Mr. White was still his senior, and he wasn't that familiar with him. In any case, Luo Nan could no longer let Papercut do this for him. He could only grit his teeth and agree. It was also at this moment that he suddenly thought of something. If every time he went into seclusion to cultivate, he would have to lose control and spend a lot of energy to clean up after himself, would it be worth it? Mrs. Luo Shuqing was a bit baffled during breakfast the next morning. She kept feeling that something was off with Luo Nan. In the end, he couldn't help but ask, what are you so conflicted about? Oh, Luo Nan tightly stuffed a large amount of meat into his mouth. When he raised his head, he had an innocent expression on his face. Your eyebrows are all knotted, and you still say you're not conflicted? Luo Nan swallowed the slice of meat with great difficulty. He continued to play dumb. Are you conflicted? Oh, my forehead is fighting with the marginal lobes. In the end, Mrs. Luo Shuqing's attainments in psychology were decent. She went around in circles and finally understood. In psychology, the prefrontal cortex represented rationality and self-control, while the marginal lobes represented impulsive emotions. It could also be understood as the struggle between long-term benefits and short-term benefits. Luo Nen was just speaking carelessly, and he shivered. However, his words did contain some true emotions. He didn't go looking for Mr. Bai last night. The reason was that he wasn't familiar with Mr. Bai. It was too late, and he was afraid of disturbing Mr. Bai's rest. To put it bluntly, his otaku cancer flared up. He displayed a fear of interpersonal relationships. He dragged it out as long as he could. He knew how to kill someone he was familiar with, and, in the end, he went looking for Secretary He. He learned that the branch's database did indeed have a recording of the high-level seminar back then. However, Luo Nen wasn't able to get his hands on it. He Wayne warned him very bluntly not to bite off more than he could chew. The B-rank technique, Heart Incineration Blade, involved too many elements. Many of them were knowledge unique to architects. Without a solid foundation, forcefully practicing was no good. Essentially speaking, Luo Nen hadn't even reached the standard of an awakened due to the imbalance between his body and soul. This was a problem with the standard. It wouldn't change just because his combat strength was superb. A missile that could explode at any time was indeed more frightening and destructive than a refined rifle. However, the control power needed to be looked at the other way around. Last night, Luo Nen even asked how to pour the milk. Oh no, he asked how to use his ultimate move. In the end, He Wayne saw through his worsening condition of the imbalance between his body and soul. Only after tossing and turning for a while did he avoid the pain of inspection. He didn't get any results in his training that night. It was hard for Luo Nen to avoid feeling emotional. However, he had forgotten that his aunt had been paranoid these past 2 days. She was worried that Luo Nen had stepped into some domain. Luo Shuqing immediately became nervous when he heard his vague and suggestive words. Did that firm come to recruit you again? Luo Nen slapped himself in the face in his mind and cursed his foul mouth. He rushed to ease Luo Shuqing's mind. Nope. I haven't contacted them for the past 2 days. They were just speaking carelessly. It would have been better if he didn't explain. The more he explained, the more Luo Shuqing became suspicious. She put down her bowl and chopsticks, wanting to understand the situation in depth. At this time, Mo Haihang, who was swiping at the table and reading the newspaper, suddenly jumped out with a sentence. Actually, if there's no danger, you can give it a try. Young people are just trial and error. Only by making mistakes can you gather effective information. He brought out the trial and error theory again, and this time he took it a step further. You can go to their firm and try it out. See if it suits your heart. If you want to do it, then draft up a contract and bring it back for your aunt to help examine it. You're in high school now. Financial independence can be put on the agenda. Luo Shuqing turned to glare angrily at her husband, but she soon understood something. She furrowed her brows in silence. There was one more person who was at a loss. They clearly wanted to get to the bottom of things. Luo Nen knew long ago that his aunt and uncle were worried about the direction of the so-called trial and error theory. He could see through them with a single glance. He couldn't help but feel even more depressed. He groaned in his mind. It's all a misunderstanding. He began to ponder whether or not he should ask Zhang Yingying for help. She should set up a trap and play a two-man show to calm the hearts of these two elders. Breakfast ended hastily amidst the confusion and probing. Today was Sunday, November 4th, 2096. The accidental injury in the morning seemed to have given a bad start to the day's schedule. Luo Nan's aunt and uncle, as well as Mo Yin, went out to do their own things after breakfast. Luo Nan continued to stay at home, carelessly observing the star atlas of the format pyramid. He was intimidated by the continuously increasing water level of the vast ocean of icebergs. He dejectedly withdrew from the fixed space, holding his head in distress. He couldn't delve any deeper into the homework related to formatting theory before he found a suitable channel to pour milk. Even the root receptacle, root nature, and root trigger division technique personally taught by the gym master couldn't be considered due to too many connections. As for the internal refinement technique of the 9 orifices and 6 roots, Luo Nan had already mastered it during the morning class. There was no need to superfluously paint a snake with legs. Luo Nan had been at home for an entire day. He needed to do something, right? Luo then rolled around on his bed twice. In the end, he had no other choice but to follow Papercut's suggestion. He opened up the mission posting page for soul strength information gathering and flipped through the dripping sword teaching materials that Papercut had sent over. He wanted to see if he could discover anything interesting from it. For the fastest and most error-free novel reading, please visit Chapter 376. It had to be said that Luo Nan's mood was quite high right now. Most of his thoughts last night were on the heart-searing blade, the legendary secret technique of pouring milk. He only skimmed a few glances at the C-rank technique, the dripping sword. He did not sink his heart into it. He only knew that this technique mainly condensed water vapor out of thin air to attack the enemy's weak points. It was a bit like the magicians in fantasy novels, but the sound and light effects were inferior. Right now, Luo Nan wanted to go deep into contact with this technique. He first looked at the original recording on Annex 2 of Headquarters RT-8313 mission. Speaking up to this point, he actually wanted to look at Annex 3 yesterday, but he did not have the authority to read it. He could only look at the summary and the like. Only ability users at the architect rank or above could see the full picture. How infuriating! Luo Nan grinned as he waited for the network to buffer. The demonstration recording on the Annex used the reality level of video and audio storage specifications. Its volume was enormous. Even with the special network form of the Hexa-ear, a period of time was needed for smooth playback. The volume specification corresponded with its value. After all, this was a teaching demonstration for all ability users in the world, and it was done by Her Majesty Empress Wu herself. According to the suggestion of the Hexa-ear's AI assistant, Luo Nan chose the reality mode with the best results. This was the function of the simulator on the 4th level of the psychic wave network. Right now, Luo Nan had already solved the problem of interference power. He could use the related functions without any pressure. He closed his eyes. After the darkness naturally descended, gentle light slowly seeped in. The light gradually deepened and changed. In the end, it formed a scene of interweaving gray and dark red. There were also intersecting noises, wind pressure, the choking smell of the earth, and even the dry sensation of his skin entering at the same time. He was instantly brought to the vast and spacious wilderness. Luo Nan was already used to such simulation guidance. He just felt that the simulator of the psychic wave network was a bit more exquisite than the burner version of Frost River reality. Right now, he was at the entry level of the 9 orifices and 6 roots technique. The stimulation of these nerve cells caused his internal organs, fascia, skin, and flesh to react instinctively. He needed to give himself another hint to make up for the disparity in perception between his mind and fleshly body. Luo Nan raised his head to look into the distance. Right now, he was at the top of a hill. This was the highest point relative to the surrounding environment. The dark red earth beneath their feet was cracked layer by layer, extending endlessly towards the horizon. This was, without a doubt, the wilderness. In the next second, Luo Nan's attention was involuntarily drawn by the bright, sharp, and valiant slender figure in front of him. He suddenly realized who was the main character in this world. Her Majesty Martial Empress. For the time being, only the silhouette of Her Majesty Empress Wu could be seen. She was wearing a tailored hunting suit that was tight at the waist. It was dark red in color and paired with brown boots, which highlighted her long legs and matched her slender figure. What was more eye-catching was the lightweight electromagnetic rifle slung across her shoulder. The body of the rifle was cut off by a simple and low-profile ponytail, but it still reminded everyone that this was a dangerous wasteland. This outfit was similar to the color of the wasteland and could also serve as camouflage. It looked more professional, but it also had a wonderful sense of fashion, forming a very wonderful balance. Well, any man would find similar reasons when facing a stunning beauty. To Her Majesty Empress Wu, that rifle was no different from a bag in a fashionable woman's hand. They were both plastic arts. Luo Nan's imagination ran wild as he tried to move about in reality. The enormous video and audio storage format of reality should have left enough space for interaction. But Her Majesty Empress Wu's image did not respond. Could it be that there were no relevant interaction resources stored? Just as Luo Nan's thoughts spun, Her Majesty Empress Wu suddenly turned around. Her gorgeous, bright, and beautiful face appeared without reservation. It was within Luo Nan's breathing range. Luo Nan actually took a step back. Of course, Luo Nan recognized Her Majesty Empress Wu. Though he had never formally met her, Bamboo Pole's notes on the most important people of the world course had photos, videos, and other video materials. Especially for a stunning beauty like Her Majesty Empress Wu. All kinds of materials were even more complete. Luo Nan's impression of Her Majesty Empress Wu was, of course, extremely beautiful. She especially loved to smile. In all kinds of video materials, Her Majesty Empress Wu always revealed a reserved, unrestrained, cordial, mocking, or fierce smile. Her smile infused the already bright and gorgeous image with an even more vivid color. Luo Nan only believed that Bamboo Pole had specially chosen materials during the class. Only later did he find out that Her Majesty Empress Wu had left behind all the video materials ever since she became famous. Whether it was photos or videos, she had never left behind any expressionless moments. Luo Nan felt that it was interesting at first, but it made his hair stand on end when he thought about it. Cough. These were Bamboo Pole's original words. At the time, Bamboo Pole spoke as a footnote to Her Majesty Empress Wu's temperamental personality. It left an incomparably deep impression on Luo Nan. Her Majesty Empress Wu in the reality recording was obviously smiling. It was the kind of professional smile that made her seem like a competent host. Oh no, she was more like a tour guide. In fact, this was a reality experience of travel and adventure. With the support of reality technology, those bold characters could completely greet Her Majesty Empress Wu before them. They could shake hands. They could even say a few flowery words. There shouldn't be any problems. However, Luo Nan shrunk back. He shrunk back in great embarrassment. The beautiful face that was so close at hand gave him a tremendous pressure. Was it an incurable outbreak of otaku cancer? Luo Nan was willing to believe that it was Bamboo Pole's explanation that day that left a shadow in his heart. It was needless to say that Her Majesty Empress Wu was famous for her beauty in her early years. Her appearance could be said to be ostentatiously beautiful. Her facial features were completely flawless, but there was always something out of line between her brows and eyes. Bamboo Pole, who had seen countless beauties, had this to say. This so-called out of line was actually a kind of oppressive force. People could feel an unquestionable dominant force from Her Majesty Empress Wu's smile from time to time. She was charming, and you would be infatuated. She was gentle, and you would be satisfied. She was fierce, and you would tremble. She was callous, and you would be fearful. Any high-level intelligent life form had a relatively clear self-awareness. Their thinking instinctively revolved around themselves. No one wanted to become someone else's prey. But Her Majesty Empress Wu's out-of-line beauty, supported by her boldness, transformed into a sharp weapon that pointed at the weakest part of the human heart. Perhaps Luo Nan was scaring himself. Right now, Luo Nan had a trembling feeling of facing a sharp blade. He only relaxed a bit when he pulled some distance away. Such a reaction hurt Luo Nan's self-esteem. What the hell? If I'm like this when I see a virtual image, won't I immediately kneel when I see the real person? He slapped his cheeks. A wave of rebellious psychology, a common trait at his age, stirred restlessly. He really wanted to use his interactive function to do something to retaliate. Chapter 377. Our target has arrived. Her Majesty Empress Wu's side profile had slightly parted bangs and a low, fluffy ponytail style. She embellished a full sense of elegance, but the impact was reduced a bit. Compared to her breathtaking appearance, Her Majesty Empress Wu's voice was a bit calmer. It was a bit deeper, and she spoke a bit slower. Her enunciation was especially clear, and her tone fluctuated vividly. Combined with her smile, it made one wonder if there was some hidden meaning behind her words. Luo Nan felt even more nervous. He heaved a sigh of relief and turned his head to look at the foot of the hill. An ugly hairless monster had just appeared. Its shoulder height was definitely more than 2 meters, its body was fat, and it had long fangs. It was shaking its layers of thick skin and flesh as it silently rushed up. It was less than 50 meters away from them. The scene suddenly tensed up. Her Majesty Empress Wu explained unhurriedly, "This is a pleated wild boar. It's a low-level mutant commonly seen in the wilderness. It has practically no research value, but its skin is thick and its blood is long. Its impact force is extraordinary as well. When it's in a group, it's quite irritating." Her Majesty Empress Wu removed the portable electromagnetic rifle from her shoulder as she spoke. She didn't even take aim. She opened fire with one hand, confident and at ease. The metal bullet accurately struck the head of the pleated wild boar, the thinnest part of its skin. It embedded itself deeply, but soon the flesh squirmed and the bullet fell off. Blood flowed like a fountain, smearing its face. The pleated wild boar was a bit dizzy, but it shook its head. It still charged forward courageously, fully verifying the evaluation of its skin being thick and blood being long. Her Majesty Empress Wu's figure didn't move. She continued with a smile, "Pure physical impact isn't that effective. The firearms of the military require a certain degree of concentrated fire in order to be effective. However, as ability users, we can do this." The pleated wild boar's angry eye socket burst with blood just as her voice fell. This enormous mutant let out an extremely disproportionate shriek from its throat. Its body staggered, and it nearly slipped. Luonin looked at its left eye socket. A bloody hole had exploded there. It was badly mangled, and one eye was already blind. Luonin was baffled. What just happened? He didn't see Her Majesty Empress Wu make any unnecessary movements. The wild boar, which had lost one eye, became extremely manic. Even if there was a problem with the correct location, the speed of the galloping was even faster. It was at this time that an excellent video clip appeared next to Luo Nan in the form of an AR. It replayed the moment just now in slow motion, helping a rookie like Luo Nan to reconstruct the process. Her Majesty Empress Wu gave a synchronized explanation. The virtual screen clearly showed that when the pleated skin wild boar charged, translucent water droplets condensed in midair and pierced through the pupils, causing the fragile eyeballs to explode. But that was all. Her Majesty Empress Wu also said, "I just unleashed a dripping sword, but the effect wasn't too good. The reason why I'm doing this is to show everyone one thing. In practical applications, you shouldn't overestimate its lethality. After all, this is only an awakened level technique. If you don't use it properly, it will make the situation worse." It sounded very reasonable, but was it really not because of a mistake? Luo Nin had yet to walk out from the shadow of losing face. He couldn't help harboring a subtle thought and made malicious guesses. But in the next second, the other eyeball of the pleated wild boar, which was still 20 meters away, exploded. The situation seemed to be similar to last time. The pleated wild boar roared once more, but its roar was cut off halfway. Its thick and sturdy body lost its balance. It simply fell to the ground and slid forward. It lost all kinetic energy when it was around 5 meters away from Her Majesty Empress Wu. All that was left was the instinctive twitching of its limbs. Luonin gaped. This time he really didn't understand where the problem lay. At this time, Her Majesty Empress Wu took 2 steps forward. She was like a field researcher. She knelt on one knee next to the pleated wild boar, allowing the dry red earth to stick to her hunting clothes. Then, her slender fingers swiped through the air, and the head of the pleated wild boar that was as hard as iron was cut apart. It was only this inhuman action that made people remember her identity as an extraordinary. Oh, she wasn't one 3 years ago. Luo Nin didn't know how many times he had been stumped by this train of thought. The dissection scene was very bloody, but it helped to restore the truth. It was as if Luo Nan was at the scene. He took 2 steps forward and saw that the brain of the pleated wild boar had completely turned into a paste. Forget a wild boar, even a giant elephant would be cleanly wiped out by this kind of damage. But why was the effect so different between the 2 times? Could it be that she was cheating? Luo Nan sank into malicious conjectures, finding it hard to extricate himself. On the other side, Her Majesty Empress Wu had already given the answer. In terms of destructive power, this is the effect of the water droplet impact, which is enhanced by both sharpening and exploding. And in order to control it, to penetrate the eye and enter the brain, there's also the enhancement of guidance. Her Majesty Empress Wu smiled as she explained the key points of this attack technique. As mentioned before, the dripping sword was called a sword, but it was actually an attack technique that interfered with the material plane of the mind. The principle was to use soul strength to form a special circuit, to fully do work, to absorb the water molecules in the atmosphere, to achieve a series of blessings such as sharpening, exploding, amplification, acceleration, guidance, and so on. It was a technique that killed the enemy in an instant. The core circuit structure of the dripping sword technique was known as the condensation ring. Only through this structure could water molecules be rapidly gathered. And on this basis, various effects such as sharpening, amplification, exploding, and so on could be realized. For this reason, soul strength needed to be close to the material plane. It was sculpted and shaped. It didn't matter if it was rough, and it didn't matter if it couldn't be maintained for a long time. The key point was the suddenness and explosive power of the instantaneous shape. It's not easy to absorb water from thin air, and it will delay the battle. Therefore, the most ideal way to use it is through the enemy's eyes, mouth, and other places that are more moist. It is possible to compress the gathering time as much as possible, using food to feed the enemy to achieve an instantaneous effect. Her Majesty Empress Wu's attitude was candid. She didn't hide the shortcomings of this technique when it was used in actual combat. I'll repeat once more. Pure beads of water have no lethality. It must possess the 5 blessings of sharpening, amplification, acceleration, explosion, and guidance. Only then will it be meaningful. And these 6 structures are all independent. Aside from the condensation ring being the core step, the other effects will need to be increased or decreased according to specific circumstances. For this reason, one must maintain a high degree of calmness and clear-headedness in actual combat when using this technique. Unfortunately, quite a few people aren't able to do this. It has nothing to do with talent. It's just a matter of character. Wasn't character also a part of talent? Luo Nin really wanted to use the root receptacle, root nature, and root trigger division technique. He just learned to fight against Her Majesty Empress Wu. Unfortunately, this was meaningless. Her Majesty Empress Wu explained the 6 structural circuits one by one, including the condensation ring. She combined this with the magnified model on the virtual screen and a live demonstration. She explained the profound in simple terms and was very clear and easy to understand. The clarity of the reality level combined with the powerful playback function of the hexa ear created an astonishing effect. Aside from theory, Her Majesty Empress Wu condensed the structural circuits in a casual manner. Even if she deliberately made them visible for the sake of demonstration, the fluctuations and changes of soul strength could still be sensed by others. This was not easy at all. No wonder the volume of the video file was enormous. How many resources would be consumed to reproduce such details? And there was certainly the specialized technology of the inner world inside. Her Majesty Empress Wu, who was in the reality realm, took the opportunity to sell her personal goods. The current application techniques of the mental side are the art of structure. Ability users fully utilize the plasticity of soul strength to form functional structures with interference power. Then they can influence and control more effective material components to realize the extraordinary effect of the mind distorting reality. Luo Nin nodded over and over as he listened. He thought of the wraith sign. The human-faced arachnids' offensive methods were often realized through complex and special structures. It was just that this fellow had no material foundation at all. It could only create shadows on the mental plane. There was also the configuration that Jack spoke of. It was the operational structure of energy and information. It manifested itself extremely clearly on the body of a burner. Her Majesty Empress Wu even mentioned the high-end application standards of the dripping sword on the topic of the art of structure. According to her, it was not difficult to make the water droplet explode. What was difficult was to condense it into a pellet, to be as sharp as a blade, to strike a vital point without injuring oneself. However, the sculpting and shaping of the condensation ring needed to be extremely precise in order to realize this point. The structure was stable, and it consumed too much mental energy. It was not economical enough, so there was no need to criticize her for seeking perfection. The consumption was too great. It was not economical enough. Luo Nan was very sensitive to consumption right now. His ears immediately perked up. Could it be that this small water droplet, which appeared and exploded in an instant, could consume a large amount of soul strength? His interest rose by several levels in an instant. Unfortunately, Her Majesty Empress Wu did not demonstrate this so-called high-end technique. This caused Luo Nan's malicious conjecture to erupt once more. Could it be that you couldn't do it back then? The video ended, but Luo Nan was still unsatisfied. He had yet to look at the lecture notes that Papercut sent over. Just by starting with Her Majesty Empress Wu's explanation, Luo Nan already had his own understanding. Control, precision, and improvisation were the core of the dripping sword technique, but the most basic thing was still precision. The basic requirement was to sculpt the relevant structure on the millimeter scale. A rough mold would be ineffective. Precision was the best. Luo Nan was a precision-oriented, mentally enhanced user. His mental senses were first-rate acuity, and he had a basic understanding of configurations. He had an enormous advantage in this aspect. Papercut was right. This technique seemed to have been specially prepared for him. Oh, that's right. He could also be considered an artist. Structural art, in a certain sense, could also be considered a plastic art. Luo Nan temporarily tossed his desire for the heart incineration blade beyond the highest heavens. He couldn't help but want to put this C-rank technique into practice. Plus, he was ambitious. He wanted to come from a higher place. He disdained the kind of short-term, unstable structure. If he was going to use it, he would use the most sophisticated kind. Luo Nan immediately followed Her Majesty Empress Wu's suggestion. He turned on the air humidifier in the room, increasing the moisture content in the air. He followed Papercut's explanation step by step, attempting to sculpt the structure with his soul strength. On one hand, Luo Nan was ambitious. On the other hand, he had a cautious temperament. He didn't want to eat a fatty in one bite. He wanted to completely grasp the relatively complex overall structure of the dripping sword. Instead, he temporarily ignored the 5 types of amplification structures. He stared at the condensation ring with all his attention. This structural circuit was the beginning and foundation of the mental interfering with the material plane. If he didn't thoroughly understand it, he wouldn't be able to talk about the rest. From a magnified microscopic model, the structure of the condensation ring was more like a smooth donut. The center was empty, and the overall rules weren't complicated. But many people would simply kneel if they wanted to accurately depict the 3-dimensional curved structure of the inner and outer rings with soul strength. This was the difficulty that Her Majesty Empress Wu emphasized. However, Luo Nan only failed twice in the gradually damp bedroom air. He was able to make the relevant structure appear in the void. The diameter of this condensation ring was only 0.02 millimeters. Just this one move was enough to crush the vast majority of Awakened. Of course, the sculpting effort was a bit more in the beginning. According to the timer of the hexayear and the time it took for the water molecules to gather and take shape, it was already close to 10 seconds. As for the structure of the condensation ring itself, it was hard to avoid roughness. The time it took for the water droplet to take shape after forming was pitifully low compared to the time it took to gather. It was only 0.4 seconds. It was completely meaningless in combat. But what was that phrase again? Practice makes perfect. Compared to the energy and information operating structure of the human-faced arachnid, doing this kind of work, aside from being smaller in size, was the same as drawing a more complex circle. If one didn't care about the precision and details, then it really wasn't a big deal. Luo Nan was a bit dissatisfied with this. Who said that the consumption was great? But this was indeed convenient for large amounts of practice. Once one was done, there was no need to worry about it anymore. It could gather water molecules on its own and then break apart. Luonin only cared about the next one and continued to make adjustments. He did it every 3 to 5 seconds. He did it 20 times in a minute. Soon, he became familiar with the structure of the condensation ring. He could compress the majority of the condensation ring's shape to 2 to 3 seconds. He did it 30 times in a minute, 30 repetitions in a minute, and most of them were substandard products. It was hard to be effective. Was it boring? Was it frustrating? Perhaps some people felt that it was boring and frustrating, but Luonin didn't think so. Everything depended on the details. When he learned to sketch and sketch, he relied on large amounts of practice to slowly grind them out. When he sketched the outline, it seemed as if he was drawing lines that were all the same. It was repetitive and tedious, but in reality, his hand could clearly sense whether it was stiff or soft, rough or exquisite. A person's aesthetic sense could be accurately grasped, and the corresponding sense of accomplishment would inevitably follow. Yes, only when one's thinking was exquisite could one touch upon a more subtle level. One could capture a little change, a little progress, and the sense of accomplishment. It was as Her Majesty Empress Wu had said. The dripping sword technique was a kind of structural art. A slight transformation was a kind of plastic art. Luonin's perception and aesthetic sense could be judged. Therefore, Luonin could borrow his previous successful experience to know what sort of standard he needed to reach. He was mentally prepared for the dry and tedious practice in the early stages. The distance wasn't too far. His progress could be seen. Why not complete it in a spurt of energy? Luonin really did treat it as a painting. He followed the routine from back in the day. After a short period of brainless practice, he no longer casually used his thoughts to shape. Instead, he used his brain. He compared it with Her Majesty Empress Wu's example, carefully imitating and correcting it. He first slowed down. After gaining some understanding, he began to speed up. Then he slowed down again. Then he sped up again. In the end, he sped up all the way. Luonin forgot how many times he practiced. In the beginning, he recorded it through the hexa ear, but how could he care about it later on? Around 2 hours passed, and it was almost time for lunch. Luonin's mind suddenly lit up. The brush and carving knife of his soul strength were extraordinarily smooth and quick. He practically couldn't feel the process of carving. A strand of thought was like a seal. It firmly pressed down, and the condensation ring was engraved on the boundary between the mental and material planes. Chapter 378. Luonin was stupefied for a moment. In this short amount of time, a bead of water the size of a pinky finger had appeared out of nothing. It was born out of thin air and quietly floated before his eyes. With a slight movement, it refracted the sunlight that seeped in through the window. It was a riot of colors. It was extremely beautiful. A feeling of satisfaction rushed to the top of his mind. Luonin grinned, and his mind relaxed. Only then did he feel tired. Tired? Oh, that's right. He might still have a lot of soul power left, but the energy and attention that came with it were related to the physical foundation of the nervous system. It was impossible for him to expend it endlessly. He fell back, arms outstretched on the bed. A few drops of water fell on his cheeks, forehead, and some on his arms and collar. It was so refreshing that he moaned in comfort. Luonin suddenly opened his eyes. He could only watch helplessly as a layer of mist floated down, instantly drenching his body and all the objects around him. Holy shit! Luonin jumped up, but it was already too late. The spray of mist had ended, and the quilt on the bed was damp. It was wet and damp, and it felt terrible. The covers of the 2 notebooks on the bed were also full of water droplets. Fortunately, they were made of leather, so they could be easily wiped. As for the quilt, he really had to move it to the balcony to dry. What was going on? The humidifier is also causing an economic crisis? Luonin wiped away the water stains on his face. His first reaction was to turn off the humidifier, but it looked like the humidifier was operating normally. He could only release his mental senses to observe the air humidity and the changes on the mental plane. In this way, he discovered some clues. Currently, the aftermath of the interference between the mental and material planes was extraordinarily intense. The sources were different, and the number was extremely great. However, the amplitude of the fluctuations was relatively similar. It had a clear effect on the water vapor in the air. This gave Luo Nan a rough guess. Perhaps it was due to the latter half of his practice that the sculpting of the condensation ring structure had become more reliable. Its ability to sustain itself had greatly improved. After accumulating a certain amount of water, it would naturally take on the form of a water droplet. Because Luo Nan was completely engrossed in pondering the structure of the condensation ring, he was engrossed in training with a single heart. His impression of the ring remained at the very beginning. Just like that, the water droplets lasted longer and longer, and the speed at which they disintegrated became slower and slower. In the end, there were at least a few hundred water droplets floating in the room. When he was distracted and lost control of his mind, the structure of the water droplets became chaotic and exploded, turning into a thick mist. That was about it. Luo Nan shook his head and sighed. He roughly tidied himself up, lifted his blanket, and went to the balcony. Just as he took 2 steps forward, a glint of water flashed in the corner of his eyes. It was a water droplet that had just formed. Oh, this of time of time. Luo Nan hugged the blanket and stared at the beads of water. He was sure that all the water droplets had exploded, and it was definitely true. Perhaps it was because Luo Nan's feeling was on point, but the final structure of the condensation ring that Luo Nan sculpted was the most perfect in terms of shape. Its precision reached a certain standard. After a period of turbulence, the water that had gathered completely dispersed, but the basic structure of the condensation ring did not explode like other rings of the same kind. Instead, it tenaciously preserved itself. Of Luo Nan's attention was temporarily focused on this bead of water. Not much of the consumption. Strands. Endless. Perhaps for other mentally enhanced users, long periods of time would be a bit of pressure. But Luo Nan's soul strength was affected by the high output of the format pyramid production line. Every second of progress was several times that of this kind of consumption. It didn't hurt nor itch. If this was called consumption, then the whole world was in an economic crisis. Luo Nan grinned. Since it involved the relevant situation, he instinctively used introspection to look at the state of his god gear. Just as he cut into the past, his thoughts suddenly froze on the spot. Dropped? It was completely different from what he imagined. The water level of the vast ocean of icebergs, which was already overflowing, had actually dropped by a chunk for some unknown reason. It was even lower than yesterday's normal state. With such an astonishing drop, it was no wonder that he felt a sense of exhaustion. Luo Nan was a bit stupefied. This didn't make sense. The consumption of the condensation ring needed to be multiplied by 1,000 to 10,000 times in order to achieve this sort of effect. Luo Nan subconsciously hugged the quilt to his chest. The slight moisture on it reminded him of something. The room had just been sprinkled with water mist. He thought about it. A single condensation ring obviously didn't consume much. But if several hundred condensation rings existed at the same time, then several thousand would be produced in succession, and the process would continue without end. This consumption could no longer be ignored. It was common knowledge that multiple missions consumed a lot of resources. It was possible for this kind of consumption to exceed the output of the format pyramid production line for a period of time. In other words, Luo Nan's large amount of practice had turned into actual milk pouring as several hundred water droplets exploded. He poured the excess soul strength into the river. No, there was still a scene of milk pouring. But what was this? Atomization? Evaporation? Sublimation? Luo Nan laughed bitterly at first, but then he laughed heartily. He even tossed the damp quilt up in celebration. Even though the input and output were completely disproportionate, and the effect couldn't be said to be a permanent cure, it was still a pleasant surprise to be able to resolve a threat. Luo Nan never imagined that the matter would be resolved so easily when his symptoms relapsed. Moreover, he even obtained a rather effective emergency measure. The pressure was immediately swept clean. This feeling of being able to advance and retreat freely was too refreshing. Luo Nan's mood became very good. He cast his gaze toward the water droplet, and it was as if he was looking at a pearl. There should be a certain upper limit to the water vapor that the condensation ring could gather. The growth of the water droplet's volume had already stagnated. In the end, it was only the size of half a pinky finger with a diameter of approximately 1 centimeter. It wasn't exactly eye-catching, but it was quite eye-catching when refracting light. Luonan thought for a moment. He wasn't going to disperse the water droplet for now. He wanted to see how long it could last and how its overall consumption was. He would certainly have to try out the 5 auxiliary structures in a bit. He just happened to use the core condensation ring as a base. Luonan hastily hung the quilt on the balcony and went downstairs to eat. The water droplet spun around his body. It was quite spiritual. The water droplet did not have the support of the heart ape technique. Instead, it was tightly linked with his soul strength. It was like an extension of his limbs. As time passed, the power of habit displayed more and more astonishing effects. When one was used to something, one would unconsciously ignore it. Luonan temporarily forgot about the water droplet beside him. He fought with the AI butler's anti-human nutritious meal. There was nothing else on this table, but the function of filling one's stomach was complete. Luonan didn't stay idle as he ate in large mouthfuls. He originally wanted to flip through the handouts and notes that Papercut had sent over, but after some thought, he continued to flip through the mission posting page. There was nothing else on Her Majesty Empress Wu's posting interface. However, the discussion area below, the traditional message page, had 20 messages that filled the page. Right now, there were a terrifying number of over 18,000 pages. There were only a few awakened in the entire world. Luonan remembered Zhang Yingying saying that there were less than 70,000 registered awakened in the entire world. This meant that every awakened had posted at least 5 times in the discussion area. Even though this was the accumulation of 3 years, there were certainly quite a few quarreling and spiteful messages within. But from the perspective of the inner world, this was truly a national event. The influence of the world subjugation event could be seen at a glance. The messages in the reply area were arranged in reverse order by default. The newest message was at the very top. It was from 10 minutes ago, and the content was a daily kneel. Luonan traced back an hour. There were 2 more messages, indicating that the popularity of the discussion did not decrease. They were still in the godly posts. Luonan wanted to understand the atmosphere at the time, so he switched the replies to the proper order. He started from the beginning and skimmed through 3 to 5 pages. Most of the messages were, "Is this real or fake? What a beauty. She's my type. Beware of soul fingerprint collection traps. First-time measurement data, and other hipster messages." Of course, there were also the current Wu Ziqian. She must be a hype. And other idiotic messages that were brutally whipped into corpses. It was very clear that Her Majesty Empress Wu of 3 years ago was not a particularly outstanding character in the world. She did not possess global fame, but it was precisely after this incident that she truly soared to the heavens. She added more and more legendary colors to the world subjugation event. Luonan more or less admired her. Even though he felt that the martial empress secret technique was not as marvelous as it was described in practice, the influence was real. And Her Majesty Empress Wu was capable of shouldering this responsibility. Luonan skimmed through a few pages, wanting to change his method. Just thinking about the 360,000 pages was enough to make him collapse. If he really were to read page by page, he would not be able to do anything for the next 10 days to half a month. He used the Hexa-Ear's intelligent filtering function to eliminate the boring messages. He only looked at the essential replies. Just like this, there were still over 200 pages left. Many of them were tests of the dripping sword. Some were single columns of data. Some were experimental demonstrations. There are also extremely cruel combat scenes. These are the responses of several tens of thousands of ability users from all over the world toward this technique. However, these dry goods weren't the most popular of the essential posts. It was the era of national entertainment. There were always some funny and amusing messages that grabbed the most eyeballs. Luonan saw a string of hilarious scenes of practicing and using the dripping sword. There were all sorts of absurd incidents and all sorts of amusing suicides. The high difficulty of using the dripping sword fueled the vitality of these videos. Luo Nan saw a certain eccentric person use his own mouth to quickly condense water droplets. The result was a tragic explosion. Luo Nan could not refrain from giggling foolishly on the dining table. He watched a string of videos and nearly missed his afternoon class. When he returned to his bedroom to do his afternoon class, he shot a glance at the balcony. He saw the slightly swaying quilt over there. His mind suddenly stirred, and he walked straight over. Today's weather was cloudy. Sunlight came and went. The effect of drying the quilt was quite average. The color of the quilt was light, and there weren't any decorative designs on it. There were faint halos left on it, just enough to form half a fuzzy human silhouette. Luo Nin used the Hexa-Ear's visual camera function to take a picture of the quilt. Of course, he also allowed the water droplets floating in midair to enter the frame. He created the title, "A Morning of Practice in Exchange for Rain." He then posted it to the comments section. This was sharing, right? Luo Nin himself was unclear about the subtle thoughts of a youth, but his mind was still clear. He used anonymous mode. He only showed the location of his registration, which was the Xia City branch. Of course, he also showed the time of his registration. One look and Luo Nin could tell that he was a noob. This newest message soon appeared at the very top of the page. Luo Nin refreshed it twice, but there was no response for the time being. He was happy and went to do his afternoon class. It was already past 1 o'clock in the afternoon by the time he combed through the vital energy of the liver, heart, and spleen. Luo Nan was used to single-mindedly concentrating on cultivation. His mind was filled with similar elements. He had nearly forgotten about small matters like uploading photos. He shifted his attention to the water droplet that still existed. Through his mental senses, he knew that the condensation ring at its core was still stable. Perhaps as long as the supply of his soul strength didn't stop, this thing could continue to exist. The condensation ring was undoubtedly a very good carrier. Luo Nan attempted to use it to further grasp the 5 auxiliary structures of sharpening, amplification, acceleration, and so on. He was just about to replay the reality recording to learn the relevant knowledge when he suddenly recalled an essential reply he had seen during lunch. The starting point of the respondent was that he was dissatisfied with his firing speed in combat. He suspected that Her Majesty Empress Wu was cheating. The respondent started from the beginning of the video, analyzing the authenticity of the reality, recording frame by frame. Though he had serious doubts about the authenticity of the recording, the angle was more practical. He used various analysis techniques. He even captured and analyzed the soul strength fluctuations produced by Her Majesty Empress Wu in combat twice. The data was extremely detailed. This would be an excellent starting point if he wanted to replay it. This reply was very long. It was enough to start a series of posts. In fact, this was a link to a hot forum post. The number of replies it drew in was quite large. These replies of replies were distributed in various hot spots in the thread. If the reader was interested, they could see a long string of replies with a light touch of telepathy. Of course, they could also choose to use bullet screen mode, but that was too messy. Luonin didn't like it. Anyone who read the thread would inevitably be affected by the hot spots. Luo Nin paid more attention to the ones with a large number of replies. He originally wanted to lock onto the latter half of the lecture, but he stopped midway. He saw a hot spot with over 10,000 replies. What attracted his attention was a scene that left a deep impression on him. It was the moment when Her Majesty Empress Wu suddenly turned her back to the viewer not long after the video started. The poster complained, "I actually took a step back when I saw a beauty. This isn't logical. That's why I became suspicious." The replies instantly went off the mark. I'm relieved to see the poster take a step back. I really regret it at the time. Step back +1. Regret +1. Step back +1. Regret +10086. Am I the only one to throw myself at her? Raise your hand if you throw yourself at her. Does throwing yourself at her count? You don't even give me a second glance, do you? The poster has already analyzed it below. Everyone is retreating here. The video has a fixed program buried in it. It's to keep you bunch of perverts at a distance. So it was like this. Luo Nan came to a sudden realization when he saw this. So he wasn't the only one who suffered and lost face. This was the common experience of all the participants. The irresistible elements within made up for the young man's wounded heart. But then Nan was confused. The pressure that pierced the weak points of his heart and the fear he felt were also the effects of the program. Chapter 379. Emotional memories were often particularly deep, but they were often distorted. From Nan's impression, he had taken a step back. It was a true reaction of his mind. But the analysis of this quintessential post was reasonable and convincing. This created a contradiction. Should I believe the data, or should I believe my feelings? Nan believed the former for now, but he still harbored some doubts. He continued to read, hoping to find a more decisive and convincing reason. The group of braggers was exposed when they replied to this point. They had a tendency to turn back to the main topic with great difficulty, but not long after, the following comments veered off the mark. The reason was that an ID called Unchangeable Gold had sent an emoticon of someone pinching their fingers fiercely. He added 3 simple words, "I was wondering." This Unchangeable Gold was certainly a public figure. After his reply appeared, a long string of comments directly quoted the contents of his speech. It had become the center of the topic. Boss Gold has been exposed. Queen Wu, be careful of the hooligan. So that's how it is. Gold has always been like this. Boss Gold, represent headquarters in an expedition to Xia City. Most of these comments were from 3 years ago. They called out Her Majesty Empress Wu's nickname from back in the day. The atmosphere was extremely enthusiastic. But this was not the most explosive point. A dozen or so messages later, a certain ID replied with the same quote from Unchangeable Gold. The content was even simpler. It was just a string of ellipses. But it was this simple symbol that caused a group of bored people to clamor as they pounced over. They replied one after another in remembrance. It was no wonder that they were not calm. The person who came later was the true source of all evil, the instigator of all evil. Wu Ming. No one knew what happened back then. The current ID of Her Majesty Empress Wu was dyed with the most distinguished purple-gold color of the society. She was the symbol of a veteran, a powerful person, and a person with real authority in the society. After she personally replied, the comments below truly exploded. One could vaguely feel the fiery atmosphere of the time from the dense overlapping of the messages. But strangely enough, there were still people who came to pay homage to this temporary hotspot. Nan scrolled to the end and saw that the latter half of the replies were mostly, "Boss Gold is dead. Burn incense if you have something to do. Ambition is not far. The soul has returned. I don't believe that Boss Gold has disappeared. Sit and wait." Missing? The range of public figures who had been missing for 3 years was very small. Nan subconsciously opened up Unchangeable Gold's personal page. The entire page was gray in color, but the information of his rank, position, achievements, and honor were all preserved. Looking at it this way, it was easy to understand. Back then, Director Jean was most likely a purple gold certified person, which meant that he was the branch president, the headquarters deputy secretary, and a senior elder. Among this group of people, the strength of B class was considered low. The real ones were B plus or even a class, which was the level of extraordinaries. However, he had been missing for many years, so he must have missed the qualification certification process that was held once every 10 years. The relevant benefits were temporarily frozen, and the display of his ID had also become ordinary. Only this locked page and the old post from back then had some traces left. Nan really did seem to have heard of this before. It was most likely in bamboo poles, notes on the most important people of the world course. It shouldn't have been listed separately, but Nan recalled that there had been an extremely famous case of extraordinaries going missing in recent years. The Maple Pavilion case. Nan flipped through the information given to him by Bamboo Pole. His memories from the class became clear. This Mr. Unchangeable Gold was indeed a legendary character. Rumor had it that he was one of the first capital tycoons to strike it rich after the war. He had a net worth of hundreds of millions, but he had awakened to extraordinary powers by chance. He had been infatuated with them ever since, so much so that he had spent all of his wealth in order to take a step forward in cultivation. Perhaps the heavens had been moved by his determination to spend money, or perhaps the extraordinary powers he had awakened to were truly astonishing. He had advanced to become an extraordinaire in the 80s, becoming one of the most apex existences on the planet. After that, he resumed his old business and entered the sea of business. He opened a chain of hotels called the Maple Pavilion. He had brains and the status of an extraordinaire. He had opened hotels all over the world in a short few years, rushing to enter the top 100. His net worth was even greater than when he had first made his fortune. By now, no matter how one looked at it, this Mr. Unexchangeable Gold was a true winner in life. His experiences were wonderful and perfect. However, normal people couldn't understand the world of great experts. It was unknown what Unexchangeable Gold was thinking. He felt that it wasn't enough to open the Maple Pavilion hotels in the 88 metropolitan areas of the world. He began to operate hotels in the wilderness to do business with vagrants. In the beginning, he really did succeed in a few operations. He gained quite a bit of reputation among the vagrants. However, 3 years ago, he rushed to the wilderness to inspect a new location for his hotel. He suddenly encountered an accident and went missing. According to the results of the investigation at the time, the location where Unexchangeable Gold went missing was a mountainous area of nearly 2,000 square kilometers. The force of the impact pierced through the Earth's crust, detonating dormant volcanoes and changing the terrain. The power of an extraordinaire was terrifying, but it was useless. Those who should have gone missing had gone missing. Bamboo Pole mentioned Unexchangeable Gold during class. He wanted Luo Nan to understand that even an extraordinaire wasn't an omnipotent god. Coincidentally, the specific time of Unexchangeable Gold's disappearance and the time of his reply were 24 hours apart. These were the last traces of him in public before he left the metropolitan area and entered the wilderness. In a certain sense, these words could be considered his last words. Luonan finally understood the reason for the abnormal number of replies to a boring topic. In the end, it was because of this. There was clearly a closing song of a tortuous legend hidden within. Sigh. Luo Nan was no exception. He sighed and closed the analysis thread with dull interest. He didn't want to look at it for the time being. If a young man with the highest goal in life was to become an extraordinaire, he would be depressed for an entire day and night upon encountering such a thing. Luckily, Luo Nan's goal was a bit distant from this field. He adjusted himself a bit and stopped looking at the thread. There were other things he could refer to. Luonan hadn't looked at the handouts and notes that Papercut had sent him. He planned to spend half the afternoon to understand them. He never expected to discover that this handout actually revolved around the recording of reality after flipping it open. It was tightly integrated. There was nothing to say. Luonan could only activate reality and link to reading mode at the same time. He began to work hard. Of course, the handout only brushed over the first few interludes. It mainly started from the moment he discovered the pleated wild boar and entered combat mode. Sure enough, it was just as Papercut said. Her Majesty Empress Wu's personal explanation of the handout was much more detailed. It was also much more profound than the elite replies seen online. In the morning, Luonan used a mere 2 hours to train the condensation ring to a certain level. Because of this, he had some doubts about the technical difficulty and actual combat power of the entire dripping sword. But when Luonan saw the handouts personally produced by Her Majesty Empress Wu, he had to reflect on his own shallow understanding. Not only did Her Majesty Empress Wu give a thorough analysis of the condensation ring and the 5 auxiliary structures, she also mentioned many of the thoughts she had when making the video. She also added many application techniques, touching upon all kinds of combat environments, unexpected situations, variations of techniques, and so on. From what Luonan could sense, Her Majesty Empress will use the condensation ring as a foundation. She could add or subtract auxiliary structures at will. She could even add or subtract the condensation ring itself. Her Majesty Empress will revolve around the 2 vitals of the enemy, the eyes and the mouth. She could transform into a dozen major categories and hundreds and thousands of killing techniques. Luo Nin didn't quite understand the other categories, but there was a part that involved the nervous system. Just a few words were enough to make his forehead sweat. A small water droplet, through various ways of stimulating the nerves, could achieve 7 or 8 effects such as death, hallucination, paralysis, torture, and so on. Every move was highly maneuverable, as long as one's controllability was up to standard. Such endless transformations, it was simply inconceivable. It was a pity. It was a pity that Papercut had no talent in this area and wasn't very interested. The notes he recorded were a bit superficial. It wasn't very satisfying to look at them. Luo Nin hated himself for feeling guilty last night. He just wanted to dodge Yuan's warning. Not only did he not get the heart-searing blade video archive, he even skipped over the dripping sword. He read the handouts and notes from beginning to end, but he was not satisfied and wanted to read them again. He didn't expect to find another video at the end of the notes. It wasn't long, only 2 or 3 minutes. It was President Ouyang's concluding speech. Papercut had recorded it on the spur of the moment. At that time, there were more than 100 people sitting in the circular conference room. They were the backbone of the branch. Luo Nin looked around and found a few familiar faces. In the center of the conference room stood Ouyang Chun and Her Majesty the Martial Empress. Slightly to the side, Old Man Yu sat in a wheelchair, occupying a corner. The 3 heavyweights of Xia City appeared in unison. The standard of this intermediate training class was already top-notch. This made Luo Nin look forward to next year's spring training class even more. Generally speaking, the host's speech, the concluding speech, and the like should be relatively empty. They were heavy on flattery and had no substantive content. At first glance, Ouyang Chin's path was also like this. However, his evaluation method and focus were quite to Luo Nin's liking. This was what President Ouyang had said. 50 years have been spent on contemporary research on supernatural powers, from nothing to the current classification. In this period of time, the number of applied techniques alone has exceeded 70,000. Mud and sand have fallen, and fish and dragons are mixed together. I recognize the vast majority of these techniques, but I don't believe that they have any practical value that can be passed down for a long time. These applied techniques are either simple and crude. Some are tedious and complex. Some are profound and abstruse. There are few exceptions. In the future, we will probably only see them in museums. Through them, we can feel this era of barbaric growth. But a year ago, I saw the dripping sword released by Lady Wu. Its usage requirements aren't high, and its consumption isn't great. The vast majority of awakened on the mental side can use it. However, it isn't a simple matter to use it well, to use it fully, and to use it to a high standard. After today's lesson, I am even more convinced that this simple technique can completely squeeze out the potential of an awakened. It can exhaust the imagination of an architect. Even if one reaches the level of an extraordinary, one can still unearth valuable topics from this technique. The conference room in the video was in a bit of an uproar. Clearly, the participants were somewhat unable to accept President Ouyang's high evaluation. Ouyang Chun then gave his explanation. It looks like the dripping sword doesn't touch upon anything essential. But by relying on the 6 simple structures of the mental interfering with the material plane, it has realized far too many changes. It is like the basic material elements can form the entire world. We should also take note of the condensation ring at its most core position. It has an inconceivable possibility. On the microscopic plane, it achieves the highly efficient collection of water molecules through an extremely concise structure. It can completely replace the microscopic ability of extraordinaries. Why is it like this? I have yet to come to a conclusion, but this technique of going from simple to complex, from complex to simple, and switching between simple and complex at will is extremely mature, complete, and high level. So much so that I believe that this is the result of 100 years in advance. As far as the present stage is concerned, there is no way to increase or decrease it. There is nothing to nitpick about. As a user, I can know how it is, but I don't know why it is. But as a researcher, I must bow and pay my respects to this genius and exquisite design. Then President Ouyang really did turn around. He bowed his back toward the faintly smiling Her Majesty Empress Wu. The video ended here. Truly kick-ass. Luo Nin gave this crude praise to both Her Majesty Empress Wu and to President Ouyang. Using an imprecise expression, a water molecule had a diameter of approximately 0 for nanometers. Even though Luo Nan's soul strength had advanced by leaps and bounds, his precision was barely able to touch the micron level. There was still quite a bit of distance from a nanometer scale. Under normal circumstances, Luo Nin did not know how long it would take for him to effectively collect water molecules by relying solely on his soul strength. But now a tiny basic structure had accomplished this. Luo Nin was unable to figure out the mysteries within with his current level of knowledge, no matter how hard he tried. The puzzlement was hard to resolve, but it was also full of admiration. So much so that Luo Nin had a thought. It seemed that bowing to this legendary lady was not unacceptable. Another afternoon passed after Luo Nin finished reading the handouts and notes. The condensation ring gathered a small bead of water by Luo Nin's side. It was the size of a fingertip. This was already the limit of its volume. According to Her Majesty Empress Wu, Luo Nin's usage belonged to the thankless type. However, even that legendary lady would never imagine that Luo Nin possessed a production line that produced an unending stream of soul strength. When the in and the out were completely disproportionate, there was no need to measure anymore. It was fine as long as he was willful. With a slight stir of his thoughts, the bead of water he controlled was like a sword pill from a novel. It leaped and flew, coming and going freely in the room, doing as he pleased. The materialization of supernatural abilities gave him a greater sense of achievement compared to the soundless siege hammer. There was only half a day left in his closed-door cultivation. His plans could not keep up with the changes. Luo Nin's cultivation plan was far from reaching his expectations in order to clean up his mess. The dripping sword had become the most unexpected harvest. It should be firmly grasped. What? The star atlas of the format pyramid? Wouldn't that be a huge problem? In any case, Luo Nin had already developed a deep interest in the dripping sword. He even had feelings for it. Chapter 380. Luo Nin decided to press on with a spurt of energy. He grasped the 5 auxiliary structures of the dripping sword. In his opinion, this was possible. The 5 structures of amplification, acceleration, sharpening, explosion, and guidance were all built around the condensation ring. The complexity of the structure was low, and the requirements for precision were also very limited, especially the range increase, acceleration, and guidance. These 3 structures that increased the effects of control were just extensions of the condensation ring. Luo Nin only needed an hour to master them very well. Of course, this was partly due to the sturdiness of the condensation ring, which allowed him to practice on it again and again. He did not have to worry that the crude auxiliary structure would explode and cause him to start all over again. Luo Nin was already able to make the fingertip-sized bead of water dance up and down within the room. If he urged it with all his strength, it would be like a streak of water slicing through the air. It would only be able to see the light, but not the shadow. Then it would slap onto the wall. It was truly a tragic car accident. The 3 auxiliary structures had exploded on the spot, and the water accumulated in the condensation ring had all been left on the wall, flowing down the wall. Only the structure of the condensation ring had withstood the test. Luo Nin also knew that the room wasn't suitable for training, so he cast his gaze towards the sun-covered courtyard. The condensation ring, which was still accumulating water, was driven by Luo Nin to smash into the screen window. The screen window was breathable, but this condensation ring was already at the micron level. The fine mesh had no effect on it. After exiting the window, in just 2 seconds, the auxiliary structure and water were all replenished. Luo Nin had a good feeling as he watched the water vapor gather and scatter around the condensation ring. Controlling the bead of water to fly here and there felt even better. Without the restraints of the ceiling and walls, the water droplets initially flew randomly in the yard, but then they spread out in circles. Finally, They passed through the roofs and branches of the community until they flew more than 2 kilometers away. People came and went in the community on the weekend, but no one noticed the water droplets passing over their heads. Even if they did, they would only catch a glimpse of the light at most. They could not understand the truth behind it. The water droplets that were controlled by soul power could naturally reach the location covered by soul power. However, Luo Nin also comprehended Her Majesty Empress Wu's philosophy as he operated. As the distance between him and the water drop sword grew longer, he needed to expend more soul energy to maintain his connection. It also required many auxiliary structures to adjust. While making use of them, they also had to pay attention to the problem of running in. After all, it was the interference of the mind with the material plane. If there was no order between the two, it would cause unnecessary consumption and interference. As for how to ensure the most effective cooperation, there was only one way: practice. Without going through hundreds or thousands of mistakes, it would be impossible to understand the subtle and complicated relationships hidden within. Needless to say, training full of mistakes also consumed a lot of energy. According to the general knowledge Luo Nan grasped during this period of time, even if the basic structure of the condensation ring wasn't damaged, Luo Nan just needed to adjust the other 3 auxiliary structures. It would take roughly half an hour to reach the limits of a mentally enhanced awakened. However, Luo Nan didn't need to consider the issue of consumption at all. He only felt that the feeling of hitting wherever you pointed within a range of more than 10 square kilometers was super cool. He even thought that if he extrapolated from this logic, wouldn't it mean that as long as his soul left his body, wouldn't he be able to run around the streets with the dripping sword? Moreover, with his soul body's sensing range, if he was in the Nade district, he would be able to cover the entire Nade district. If he was in the Riverwood district, he would be able to surround the entire Riverwood district. How was this dripping sword compared to the flying sword in the ancient legends to behead people? Thoughts spun in and out of his mind, but in the end, he just shook his head in self-mockery. The lethality of the dripping sword was extremely limited, and it was difficult to control and transform it. There was a most basic bottleneck that determined his train of thought to be nothing more than wishful thinking. The out-of-body state was similar to what ancient metaphysics called the Een spirit leaving one's body. There was no material medium. Though one could travel 1,000 miles in one night, one could not do anything to the material world. There was no interference power to speak of. In this way, as long as his soul left his body, the condensation ring would naturally. Luo Nan's mind was suddenly stupefied. After the blank period passed, his previous train of thought was completely washed clean. The following thoughts were like grasslands after a spring or summer rainstorm. They grew endlessly. What would happen? What would happen to the condensation ring after his soul left his body? That's right. Soul strength needed to have a material medium in order to be used in the material world. If he first left his body and then made the condensation ring, his interference power would not reach a certain level. He would never be able to carve it into shape. But now, he had already made the condensation ring in advance. He had embedded this precise structure into the boundary between the mental and material planes. Though its nature was rather subtle, it was already in actual existence from the perspective of the material plane. It was tantamount to him having made a machine. This machine could automatically gather raw materials, water molecules, and carry out production. All that was left for him to do was to fill it with fuel, soul strength. In this way, when his soul left his body, the condensation ring would be the medium. It would be the medium. It would be the medium. It would be the carrier. It would be possible to realize interference. Wasn't that right? Luo Nen lay down on his bed, cutting off all his thoughts. It was better to directly test things out than to think about it. Even if he failed, he would only lose a fine-level condensation ring. At this stage, he would just lose a piece of blue equipment. As he mentally prepared himself, he decisively went into an out-of-body state. In the next second, he pulled his soul out of his body and floated out the window. He floated side by side with the 1-centimeter diameter water bead under the warm afternoon sun. There was quite a bit of time between now and noon, but the slanted rays of sunlight and the dense yang energy in the air still transformed into formless astral winds. They blew endlessly against his soul body, and the consumption of soul strength suddenly rose by a large amount. There were very few Birang powers who could go into an out-of-body state. Very few of them would brazenly go astray in the day and compete with nature in the first 2 or 3 years after they reached this realm. Student Luo Nan relied on the format pyramid production line to produce soul strength in an unending stream. He had abundant stamina and was able to do this willful method. Luo Nan still didn't consider the problem of consumption. Right now, he only paid attention to the condensation ring. The water bead had yet to collapse on the purely material plane, and there was no obvious wear and tear. As for the condensation ring at its core, it was extremely stable. It steadily consumed soul strength. Everything was calm and tranquil. It was natural. This feeling was like being engraved in a lens. It was preserved in a negative, the moment of a swift paddling through the water. Though the watermark was shallow, it was nearly permanently engraved. The infusion of Luo Nan's soul strength gave this simple remnant image a new layer of color. Through a different form, it obtained a life force. Perhaps there was a problem with the analogy he chose. Right now, Luo Nan's heart was filled with a swift, causing a nearly delusional realization to appear in him. It involved the mutual interference between the mental and material worlds. Luo Nan felt that when the interference occurred earlier, the user seemed to have warped time and space to an extremely small extent. The user had intercepted an extremely minute fragment from the endless river of time that Luo Nan had experienced. Then, the user had used soul strength to endow it with new meaning. Damn it, this topic was too deep. If Luo Nan thought a bit deeper, his brain capacity would explode. Plus, his train of thought had clearly gone astray, so he decisively gave up. In any case, the facts before his eyes verified Luo Nan's initial thoughts. There was no problem at all with continuing to control the condensation ring after his soul left his body. The two naturally intersected. There was a continuation of a timeline and a cause and effect relationship. Who created who? Who attached to who? It formed a very interesting circle. Luo Nan had a faint conjecture. Perhaps other mentally enhanced ability users wanted to use their soul bodies to interfere with the material world. They should have done so through similar methods. That was to first create a stable tool that could be attached to. It could be a condensation ring, a hot air balloon, or a glider. As long as there was a small object that could intervene between the mental and material planes, then it would be like what was said in philosophy classes. Humans create and use tools. They're different from all other animals. Then they change the world. Of course, not just any condensation ring could achieve this function. The condensation ring Luo Nan created was a piece of blue equipment. Yes, it was possible that it was a piece of purple equipment. This condensation ring had certainly crossed a certain threshold in terms of precision. It had met some strict standards. Only then was it able to maintain stability for a long period of time in the boundary zone between the mental and material planes. Only in this way could it become a tool, a machine, and not a mere delusion. Luo Nan's soul soared into the air. His soul strength continued to act on the condensation ring, forming an unquestionable interference force. The water bead's bearing capacity was quite weak. Luo Nan tried to add a bit of force, and the bead collapsed in a mist. However, the condensation ring's structure remained stable, and it continued to gather water. Luo Nan certainly needed to make adjustments if he wanted to go a step further. Luo Nan pondered over the technique within, but his brain was a bit too excited right now. His train of thought was erratic and hard to control. He had just had some inspiration for micromanipulation when a string of seemingly splendid thoughts suddenly burst forth in his mind. Yet he could not find a reason for them, stirring them into a pot of porridge. All right, this was just a reminder. He should not forget himself from excitement. Perhaps he had overlooked something. He could think deeper. Were there any relevant factors that he had not considered? Luo Nan pondered for a while to no avail, so he changed his perspective. What problems had he not resolved over the past 2 days? The economic crisis in the format pyramid, the remodeling of the star atlas, the root receptacle, the root nature, and the root nature, the outsourcing of Her Majesty Empress Wu's business, the paranoia of his aunt and uncle, the setback in the exploration of the mysteries of gear. Luo then only discovered that there were so many unresolved problems on his body after a rough combing through. This was still a time of peace. If the threats from headquarters, the Order, and Quanta Corporation were added in, would he still want to live? Luo Nan reflexively wanted to rub his own head. He wanted to see what sort of person was capable of stirring up all these threads together. However, it was his soul body that moved. The body lying on the bed in the room was motionless. This was the inconvenience of a mental journey. Hiss! The spiritual light was like a blade, instantly severing all of his chaotic thoughts. It was also like an electric shock. The powerful light tore through his mind, illuminating the hazy world for a time. Stimulated by the spiritual light, an object that existed within his brain but was not part of his flesh and blood appeared. It trembled endlessly as his soul, strength entered and exited it. The external neuron. Luonan finally thought of it. He had pondered over how to interfere with the source of the material plane after his soul left his body. Wasn't it because of the external neuron? That night, his soul left his body to explore the mysteries of gear, but it was difficult to enter. He speculated that it was very likely because he did not bring the external neuron with him. Later, he tried to absorb it purely with his soul strength, but he failed miserably. Then he created the reversal of true energy, using the material to interfere with the mental. He burned and refined it, but there were no results. But now, the condensation ring had fallen from the sky and brought him around a corner. It had actually easily and skillfully crossed the great gate of his soul, interfering with the material world. With the support of the condensation ring, his out-of-body soul was able to possess interference power without going through his fleshly body. Couldn't this method be used with the external neuron? Right? The thought was unstoppable once it formed. Luo Nan was unable to continue thinking. His soul body immediately threw itself back into the room, restoring the faintly discernible connection with his fleshly body. Then he willed it, stimulating the external neuron to produce a response. There were no surprises. The electric dragon that remained within his brain radiated a brilliant radiance. It bared its fangs and brandished its claws as it swam outwards. Electricity seeped out from between Luo Nan's eyebrows in the next moment. Luo Nan instantly severed the direct connection between his soul and fleshly body. The external neuron had just thrown itself outside his body when it lost its guidance. Naturally, it was about to retract back. Luo Nan's soul strength drove the condensation ring to meet it. On the mental plane, electricity and the condensation ring's structure collided. There's a way. How could there be contact if there was no interference? Luo Nan's joy only lasted for 1/100th of a second before the external neuron's powerful impact crushed through the condensation ring. The accumulated droplets of water simply collapsed into mist, leaving not a single drop behind. The 3 auxiliary structures that supported the condensation ring were instantly wiped out. As for the condensation ring itself, it shook violently. Luo Nan's heart sank. Was the condensation ring's carrying capacity still insufficient? Before Luo Nan could find a basis for his rising and falling emotions, the electricity of the external neuron instantly split apart. It actually followed along the structure of the condensation ring, changing and flowing. It was like a special kind of ink that followed along the traces in the void to re-inject itself. In turn, Luo Nan's soul strength was affected by the pull. It followed the traces left in the void and walked once more. Luo Nan had a clearer understanding of this process. Oh, that's not right. How is this filling? This was simply using the structure of the condensation ring as a mold. Electricity took the lead, and the main body of the external neuron came afterwards. Holy crap! Luo Nan could only watch helplessly as the condensation ring he was so proud of exploded by the external neuron. There was no luck to speak of. Even though Luo Nan had repeated the phrase blue equipment 10,000 times in advance, his heart still twitched when things came to a head. It was a good thing that he didn't scream. Just as he hated that he couldn't beat his chest and stamp his feet, a certain stimulus flashed in his mental senses. It was like a red-hot branding iron that pressed down. Luonin finally couldn't hold it in. Even though he was in his soul-body state, he still let out a cry. A structure of flowing electricity appeared in the void. It had a diameter of 0.02 millimeters and a thickness of about a quarter. Its shape was smooth and round without edges. It was like a hollow donut, but the volume was completely incomparable. This hollow structure floated in the void, steadily seizing and absorbing Luo Nan's soul strength. At the same time, it absorbed the water molecules in the atmosphere, quickly forming a scale. The first droplet of water was gathered, reflecting the sunlight. It was a riot of colors like a condensed rainbow. This was the external neuron, but at the same time, it was also the condensation ring. A dove taking over a magpie's nest? Or perhaps it was a rebirth. Chapter 381. A 7 to 8 centimeter long metal thread that was shaped like a spider's web and emitted electricity on the mental plane transformed into a hollow donut with a diameter of 0.02 millimeter and a thickness of 0.5 millimeter in front of Luo Nan's eyes. Just like that, it weaved and perhaps condensed and shrank, finally forming a microscopic structure on the micron scale and displaying a wonderful quality between the material and the spiritual plane. Fine. In any case, Luo Nan had never truly grasped the external neuron's volume, weight, and material. Luo Nan was quite cautious about the new condensation ring floating in the air. His soul force touched it carefully, but the other side was incomparably cooperative. With just a thought, he could control it effortlessly. It felt no different from the previous version. At first, Luo Nan was cautious, but later on, everything went smoothly. He was already unable to distinguish the difference between the two versions of the condensation ring. Subconsciously, he controlled the water droplets to fly up and down in the bedroom. The rest of his brain was occupied with thinking, what concept is this? What's the principle behind this? What kind of trick is this? Why the F***CK? His emotions, which had been muddled by the miraculous changes of the external neuron, finally recovered the momentum that he should have after repeatedly thinking about it to no avail. With a surge of emotions, all of his thoughts were overturned. Even though the scene of Luo Nan seizing his body and exchanging his bones was a wondrous creation, and the mysteries within pointed to the essence of a universe, it was unable to overcome the ecstasy that surged within Luo Nan's mind at this very moment. No matter how good the theory was, it couldn't beat reality, right? Luo Nan already understood the practical significance of the changes. From now on, he could carry the external neuron with him to any place that his soul body could reach. Of course, this also included gear. The human mind was just that strange. No matter how strong the desire in the bottom of one's heart was, one could still remain calm when the goal was just out of reach. However, once the goal was confirmed to be within reach, all the previous cultivation would be instantly broken. Before the pleasant surprise brought by the external neuron faded, Luo Nan's mind was occupied by gear. Luo Nan confirmed that gear hid a great secret. It was a great treasure trove for him. As the key that was most likely to unlock the treasure, the external neuron also hid a big secret. Perhaps only when the two came into contact would they appear at the same time. He didn't know if his conjecture was correct, but how would he know if he didn't try? Luo Nan was a bit unable to control his emotions. He was impatient right now. The soul circled around the bedroom 3 times and came up with 3 reasons. First, today is Sunday. The construction team will not work. There are no miscellaneous people waiting there. Secondly, the soul could leave the body and bring along the external neuron. The micrometer scale structure was equivalent to the cross-section of a spider's silk. It was extremely tiny and could come and go quietly without anyone noticing. Thirdly, it was still early. He could make a round trip within 5 minutes. There was plenty of time to explore. If everything went well, he could come back for dinner. If things didn't go well, he could go back again after dinner. All the reasons were in support. All the conditions were in place. What was there to wait for? Before he could finish his thoughts, his soul body charged out of the room, ignoring the window screens and whatnot. When he reached the courtyard, he flashed out of the neighborhood and charged into the sky. Luo Nin clasped the condensation ring formed from the external neuron, and the flying speed of his soul body was not affected in the slightest. Faint traces of water could be seen in the courtyard, but he disappeared without a trace as soon as he entered the sky. At 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the sun seemed to be at the same level as the dense forest of skyscrapers. Only the endless light still floated in the clouds. At this time, it was approaching the peak traffic period. Small and medium-sized aircrafts were also shuttling back and forth in the high-altitude traffic layer. The late autumn sun was slightly warm, and the high-altitude airflow was dense and cold. The two intersected, and the impact of Luo Nan's emotions melted a bit. He suddenly came to a realization. The external neuron had a physical body. Only the heavens knew what the consequences would be if it were to collide with something while flying at high speeds. There was nothing wrong with rushing to excavate the treasure, but he was carrying the external neuron. If he were to lose it in a careless operation, he might as well smash his head into his bed and play soccer. Luo Nin was about to fly out of the Nade district by now. His thoughts stirred, and the flying speed of his soul body slowed down a bit. He was a bit further away from the uppermost traffic layer. As for the condensation ring formed from the external neuron, it floated in front of his soul body all this time. The condensed bead of water had lost too much energy from flying at high speeds. It was practically shapeless. Even though it was endlessly replenished, it was still several times smaller than when it was at its peak. An odd thought crossed Luo Nan's mind when he saw this situation. In the next moment, he used his soul strength to guide the external neuron into the interior of his soul body. As long as he didn't get into a car accident, the external neuron would be fine. The feeling of his soul body swallowing the external neuron was very subtle. This was because there was a constant transmission of soul strength between them. After the external neuron was absorbed into his body, this transmission relationship was completely assimilated into the interior of his soul body. The process was roughly like this. The soul body would first pour soul strength into the condensation ring that the external neuron had reconstructed. The power of nothingness would naturally possess the nature of interference power. It would gather the water molecules in the void. Under the high-speed flying state, the bead of water would be lost at every moment, but it would be endlessly replenished. The early stages of the accumulation of water molecules existed on the nanometer scale. Luo Nan could do nothing about it, but he could sense the large-scale condensation of water vapor in the later stages. This feeling was like the soul body inhaling and exhaling water vapor, carrying out a peculiar breathing. It naturally formed a connection with the outside world. In a traditional sense, the soul body was only at the level of a yin soul. Of course, it was impossible to realize such a connection. In fact, the source of this phenomenon came from the new version of the condensation ring. The interference power emitted by the condensation ring gathered water, and it acted back on the soul body itself. It permeated into every corner of the soul body. And then, Luo Nan's high-speed flight came to an abrupt stop. He hovered high in the sky, and below him was the stream of light from the aircraft whistling past. It was as if the entire city was operating at high speeds. Only he stood alone in the sky, distancing himself from the world below him. He didn't have the leisure to sigh with emotion. He just happened to find an interesting processing machine for his soul strength. This machine swallowed nothing and came out something. It absorbed 0 and came out 1. It burned nothingness and condensed reality. This was the condensation ring. This was the external neuron. As the interference power gradually pervaded, it was as if a set of incorporeal skeletal meridians had been stuffed into the soul body. It was draped with flesh and tendons of the same nature. Well, this description was a bit too exaggerated. A more realistic way of saying this was that Luo Nan's soul body seemed to be plated with a layer of gradually closing incorporeal, yet marvelous membrane under the full effect of the interference power. Figuratively speaking, Luo Nan's soul body seemed to have turned into a cloak. Luo Nan's core consciousness resided in the center, and he made contact with the mental and material worlds at the same time through this cloak. The cloak became the facet of the mental and material worlds, intersecting with both planes. It was thin to the point of nothingness, but it had marvelous effects. Luo Nan's consciousness was wrapped in this cloak, and it had a bit of an independent flavor. It seemed that there was an indescribable layer of separation between the mental and material planes. The feeling was subtle. The current Luo Nan was no longer on any plane. Instead, he existed in the interlayer between the mental and material planes. Wherever his mind went, he would sink in that direction. Of course, he was in a soul-body state right now, so he naturally leaned towards the mental plane. The resistance he faced on this side was minimal, close to zero. Forcefully interfering with the material plane would certainly consume a lot more energy, and there would be a few more links. But no matter how much energy was consumed, it was still a breakthrough in his essence. Luo Nan's consciousness suddenly flashed, and the incorporeal cloak stirred. It heavily smacked the nearby void under the surge of soul strength like a storm. Wind appeared out of nowhere under the sunlight, and it transformed into a fine stream. It spun and traveled several dozen meters away, nearly brushing past the upper edge of the high-altitude traffic layer before finally dissipating. The stream of air went far away, and Luo Nan's state of mind was like a whirlpool, endlessly turbulent. However, his state of mind had swelled to the extreme by the time the stream of air dissipated. See? Such a crude attack pattern was able to cause considerable turbulence in the material world. What did this mean? It meant that Luo Nan had leaped out of the stage of soul embodiment, the level of Een God. He could truly interfere with the material world, shifting the interference force from the tiny structure of the condensation ring to the entire world. Such progress was like jumping from the ground to the clouds. But under the catalysis of the external neuron, it was logical and natural. This was because this was a jump from nothing to something. It was a qualitative change from 0 to 1. 1 begets 2, 2 begets 3, and 3 begets all things. It evolved into limitless possibilities. It was impossible to overstate the great significance of the external neuron from this perspective. And, to put it bluntly, all of this was brought about by the external neuron. How did it accomplish this? In the end, what kind of product was it? What else could it do? It could serve as the framework for Luo Nan's God Gear. It could serve as the materialization of the structure of nothingness. It could serve as the pivot for the transformation of soul strength. And all of this seemed to have only unearthed a small side of the external neuron. It could do much more. For example, gear. The more doubts Luo Nan had in his mind, the more expectations he had for gear. He knew that this sort of mentality wasn't healthy, but he was unable to endure it no matter what. His soul body suddenly entered a state of flight once more, and its speed increased. Right now, his connection with the outside world grew more and more real. His perception of the late autumn setting sun and the high-altitude cold wind grew clearer and clearer. It was to the point where he forgot himself. He roused his power and howled to his heart's content. He didn't deliberately attack the material world, nor did he have the substantial power to stir the void. But the incorporeal attack on the mental plane still rapidly spread in all directions. It was fortunate that Luo Nan hid himself deep enough on the mental plane. He didn't go to a depth where most ability users could probe and create a major event. Even if he did create a major event, Luo Nan couldn't care less. He cut into the Pingjiang district of Acumen College in the blink of an eye. Gear was already in sight within the range of his mental senses with a radius of over 20 kilometers. At this very moment, there was nothing else that could attract Luo Nan's attention other than gear. But there was a difference in the magnitude of the attractive force within the various regions of gear. Luo Nan's mental senses covered the area, and he locked onto the westernmost region of the building on the ground of gear. It was a large atrium 50 meters deep and 20 meters in diameter. With a sudden jump, Luo Nan's soul body cut into gear. He arrived within the atrium and floated in the center. His feelings of urgency and anticipation suddenly transformed upon reaching his destination. Luo Nan began to become nervous. He was just as anxious as he was before. He was just as anxious as he was now. His emotions transformed to the fullest, not missing a single bit. The fluctuations of his mood didn't affect his perception at all. Within the atrium, the entire structure of gear guided and gave birth to a chilling aura. It was just like what he experienced on that night. Wave after wave of energy gathered here. After the orderly flow of energy shifted, this place lost all dominance and became chaotic. The ticking sounds rang out on the mental plane. They seemed to have a clear rhythm, but they didn't have any direction. It was like someone had purposely messed up a password lock, waiting for a successor who knew the secret to come and crack it. Of course, the successor would need to bring a special key. Luo Nan's soul body floated in the air. He suppressed his turbulent emotions and sensed earnestly for a moment. He confirmed that the current situation was no different from that night. He followed the solution from last time and gave himself a boost. He stirred the chaotic aura within the atrium once more. Last time, Luo Nan's boost revealed a classical visualization structure. It was the geometrical figure of a tetrahedron, inscribed sphere and circumscribed sphere. But as the format pyramid transformed into a star atlas, the external symbol this time changed into a rotating nebula. Its appearance was greatly different, but the effect was the same. It gave this space a thrust of order. It began the process of cyclotron acceleration like a particle accelerator. Once this process began, there was no option to slow down or stop it. Luo Nan's soul body floated alone in the atrium. He calmly welcomed the crazy scene of layers of restriction, rotation, and acceleration. He also experienced the myriad curtains that fell on the mental plane. The layers of strange information intersected. He knew long ago that the mental plane in his eyes was different from the vast majority of ability users. The mainstream theory of the structure of the mental plane divided the mental plane into 3 zones, 1 region, and 1 domain. It was simple and clear. But from Luo Nan's perspective, the mental plane was a deep multi-layered structure. There were hundreds of layers, thousands of layers, and there was no end. The vast majority of phenomena on the mental plane of the inner world could be calmly explained using general theory. In comparison, Luo Nan's perspective was far too cumbersome and complex. However, Luo Nan had never seen an explanation that was more accurate and appropriate than his multi-layered curtains perspective in describing President Ouyang's logic world. Yes, the logic world. Luo Nan never stopped pondering over the strange phenomena within the atrium over the past 2 days. He already felt that the atrium cyclotron he sensed right now was actually a bit similar to the logic world. At the very least, it was a method of distorting the mental plane. Of course, there are more differences. Chapter 382. From Luo Nan's perspective, President Ouyang's logic world used the complex structure of the mental plane to forcefully pull the distant plane over, forcefully linking it with the surrounding material world. It was like casting a hook to fish. It looked casual, but the purpose and logic were extremely strong. It was just that outsiders had no way of knowing. The atrium cyclotron took the form of the order bestowed by Luo Nan as the core. It stirred forcefully, causing the nearby region to weave and twist, pushing outwards layer by layer. It was like grabbing one end of the bedsheet and twisting it forcefully. This would cause the other end to spin, pushing it closer and further. On the other hand, the logic world already had a blueprint and was constructed layer by layer. As for the atrium cyclotron, it started from the inside out. First, it changed itself. Then it probed into the distance. One was building a house. The other was the telescope. It could be seen that the effects of soul strength were different. The structures and algorithms were different. The results were as different as heaven and earth. Luo Nan had always suspected that the huge increase in the range of his mental senses after that night was due to the effects of the telescope structure. Right now, the information gathered by the telescope was gradually enriched. The gray-white light smeared and interweaved on the mental plane, gradually materializing to reveal the marvelous landscape of the clouds high in the sky. But no matter how close the telescope's perspective was, the real situation was still separated by a layer. Last time, Luonin had fallen here. It was impossible to truly touch the cloud world that he yearned for day and night with just the telescope's structural model. It was something that Luonin could only do if he didn't rely on external objects. But today, he had the external neuron. The external neuron didn't have any particularly obvious reactions during the early stages of the Fargazer Realm's formation. It was just that the bizarre cloak that had just taken shape had already revealed a special quality due to the external neuron's influence on the road. The cloak warped and rippled within the rapidly rotating atrium vortex, but it maintained an inconceivable degree of flexibility and independence. It continued to display its ability to interfere with the mental and material planes. Because of this, the myriad curtains that fell on the mental plane were connected to the surrounding material environment through the cloak. It was just a little bit, but it was like the cloak when it took shape. It achieved a breakthrough from zero. This allowed Luonin to realize a small portion of the effect similar to the logic world. It formed a warped, independent region around his soul body. The problem was that the most powerful aspect of the logic world lay in its logic. That was the decisive factor in its construction. Luonin did not possess that sort of logic. After the interference between the mental and material planes was achieved, the corresponding area no longer belonged to the scope of the faraway rel structure. There was no specific order, and it was purely a superfluous thing. It would also increase the burden of the soul body. In just a few short seconds, the cloak had become a little sluggish. The excessive structure directly affected the efficiency of the soul energy conversion. As the situation continued to worsen, the external neuron, which was the center of the conversion, was finally stimulated. The condensation ring constructed by the external neuron showed signs of instability for the first time. Some of the lines were extracted from the condensation ring and reached the center of the structure of the condensation ring, where they performed new structures on the microscopic level. This was a completely spontaneous action of the external neuron. Luonin's consciousness did not participate. In fact, the scale of the fabric this time had already been probed down to the micron level. It exceeded the precision of his senses. Were it not for the fact that the external neuron and his consciousness were tightly linked together, Luonin would not even have the slightest of senses. Though this was the case, Luonin's state of mind was pounding and throbbing. He gradually became high-spirited. He was unable to clearly probe the composition of the external neuron, but the chilling aura and the myriad of changes in the curtains were clear to see. During the rotation-acceleration process, the chaotic, distorted interference between the mental world and the material world began to show regular fragments. The corresponding interference forces no longer conflicted and melted each other. Instead, they piled up and spun, achieving a certain reflection with the structure of the telescope. If the rotation speed of the telescope was said to be 10, then the region that Luonin could interfere with and warp had a rotation speed of 1. Every 10 revolutions of the telescope, the interference area would revolve once. It was precise and rhythmic, but it was gradually changing and speeding up. 10, 1, 10, 2, 10, 3. The rotation speed of the telescope was already relatively fixed, but the rotation speed of the interference region was constantly increasing. When it came to the material plane, there were already obvious signs. In the center of the atrium, the light in the void was clearly distorted, and the low sound of bung-bung, like the vibration of a bowstring, continued without end. If Luonin hadn't lost his temper 2 days ago and destroyed the majority of the surveillance cameras in side gear, this piece of information would have been impossible to hide. How could Luonin care about this? His soul body was located in the core region of the distorted void. He could personally experience the extent and speed of the distortion. The cloak was no longer sluggish. but the layers of acceleration accumulated astonishing potential energy. It pushed his emotions endlessly, causing his body and mind to tremble both inside and out. His guess was correct. No matter what form the external neuron took, its existence held an extremely important meaning to Gear. It was like a key was inserted into a keyhole. It twisted according to the rules of induction, and the heavy door slowly opened for him. 10-4, 10-5. In other words, when the telescope structure made 2 revolutions with his sole strength, the interference region revolved once as well. The 2 revolutions were perfectly synchronized, and Luo Nan's consciousness went blank for an instant. This was because at this very moment, the stacks of gray clouds he had been paying attention to all this time collapsed without any warning. It was as if the entire sky was pressing down heavily on him. Luo Nan came to a realization in the next second. It wasn't that the firmament was pressing down. It was that he was piercing through the clouds. Heaven and earth had already shifted. Luo Nan crashed into the depths of the nearly boundless grayish-white cloud layer. His perception of the outside world was a bit more realistic thanks to the existence of the cloak. Clouds piled upon each other under the dim lighting. Smoke flew about, and a blood-like color seeped through the gaps between the clouds. A direct chill and the ear-piercing howl of the wind came at the same time. This place seemed to be some high-altitude region, probably the upper part of the troposphere. The airflow was intensely disturbed, like a never-ending tsunami of clouds and mist. The airflow swirled the clouds, water droplets, and ice crystals. It swept past with a rumble, violent and manic. The astral wind blew through the gaps between the clouds. Luo Nan could see that there was an even vaster space beneath the thick clouds. It was just that it seemed to be covered by a prairie fire. The blood-red color between the gaps between the clouds was the reflected light. That's right. It's here. It's here. Luo Nan looked all around. He saw the cloud world that often appeared in his dreams, and he personally experienced this absurd yet realistic scene. Even though he didn't know where he was, and it was hard to distinguish between things, his impatient and unavoidably absent-minded emotions from the past 10 days finally knocked the last nail in his coffin, and it fell to the ground with a bang. He let out another howl under his impassioned excitement. This time, the cloak stirred the clouds and ice crystals, and a wave of grayish-white air rumbled out. But soon, it was swept flat by the fierce, whistling high-altitude astral wind. It was annihilated within the surging and flowing clouds, leaving no trace behind. The vile environment of this place could be seen at a glance. However, no matter how vile the environment was, Luo Nan, who had entered in his soul-body form, received the same effects as nothing. It wasn't like last time, when he had entered with his fleshly body in a muddle-headed and relaxed manner. Since he didn't have the ability to fly, he fell madly all the way. It was hard not to be flustered under the darkness of the sky. He held on for a dozen or so seconds, worried that he would fall to the ground and die without a corpse, so he could only move out. He never expected that it would be so difficult to enter again. In any case, it was hard for Luo Nan's imagination to run wild when faced with such a vast world and experience such a marvelous and strange place. In the final phase of Gear's atrium, the telescope became a silo under the magical effect of the external neuron. Luo Nan was directly transported to this cloud layer of unknown origin and unknown position. Only the heavens knew how far this place was from Xia City and Gear. A few hundred kilometers? He had never heard of a similar environment around Xia City. Tens of thousands? All right, this was very fantastical. It was very pretentious with extraordinary power. It was useless to let one's imagination run wild. Though it was difficult for Luo Nan to enter this place this time, he was 1,000 times more relaxed than last time. He decided to observe carefully and gather as much information as possible to provide a basis for his later judgment. Observation and reconnaissance had always been Luo Nan's strong suit. Pure observation combined with the living starry sky gave him an effective observation range of over 20 kilometers. Aside from extraordinaries who were unable to grasp accurately, this was a top-notch observation range in the modern world. And as the saying goes, knowing oneself speaks for itself. After Luo, Nan comprehended the principle of the structure of the telescope. The utilization of his soul strength had a clear goal. He consciously adjusted and optimized it, and there was still considerable potential to be excavated. If this continues, it won't take too long to break through with an observation range of 25 kilometers. But who the hell can tell me which part of the world has a cloud layer that exceeds 50 kilometers in thickness? And it doesn't even have a boundary? Luo Nan was at the peak of a young man's memory. His general knowledge of geography was quite decent. He remembered that the relevant course had taught him that it was impossible for the cloud layer to exceed the height of the troposphere. And the Earth's troposphere was the highest at the equator. It was only 17 or 18 kilometers. The polar regions were only 8 or 9 kilometers. What the hell was 50 kilometers? Yes. He was too timid last time. He couldn't hold on for more than a dozen seconds before fleeing. According to the results of his observations, how could he live up to the cloud layer thickness if he didn't free fall for 5 minutes? His soul body floated within the cloud layer, staring blankly for a while. During this time, the two sides of the cloak interfered, condensing mist for him to form a blurry human silhouette. It was very likely that it would become more lifelike if this continued for a period of time. Luo Nan didn't care about this. He had already begun to feel that something was wrong. Not to mention the thickness of the cloud layer. The blood-red color within the cracked and warped cloud crevices did not fade for a long time. He had previously taken it for granted that this was the influence of a great fire burning on the surface of the earth below, or perhaps a volcanic eruption. He was even prepared to use this to further clarify the specific coordinates. But right now, the range of his mental senses, which he was so proud of, couldn't even go beyond the cloud layer, let alone confirm a volcano. Moreover, was it really a volcano? Luo Nan was deeply doubtful. His observation continued. The living stars were spread out, displaying a simple ecological map within the range of the mist. A few believers continued to display their usefulness in the surroundings of the core star cluster of the self format. But the life forms further away had already switched to another group. It would be quite awkward to say another group. The cloud region was inconceivably vast, but the density of life forms was truly urgent. Luo Nan could only detect 2 or 3 kittens within the range of his senses of over 20 kilometers. All right, what did he say just now? Kittens? Luo Nan's thoughts had yet to come to a realization when a thick cloud suddenly exploded a dozen meters in front of him. Smoke scattered in all directions. A dark red shadow flashed into existence out of thin air. It was as swift as lightning, smashing through the cloud layer and pouncing in front of Luo Nan in the blink of an eye. A thick and long arm smashed over, and its sharp claws distorted Luo Nan's perception. Only now did the boiling murderous aura appear with a rumble, not only on the material plane, but on the mental plane as well. It brought forth a terrifying attack akin to an eruption of lava. The change happened right in front of him. There was no room for him to operate his thoughts. Luo Nan could only make the most instinctive reaction. The cloak interfered with the mental plane to the greatest degree. He ignored everything else, and his soul body escaped to the deepest depths he could reach on the mental plane. The blurry silhouette formed from a mist exploded and shattered, turning back into water smoke. The attack on the material plane had hit nothing but air. But the most fatal attack was still on the mental plane. He had been thinking of a volcano just now, but now there really was a volcano erupting on the mental plane. It was as if Luo Nan had returned to the time when he first saw the terrifying might of the human-faced arachnid. He looked at the enormous specter that was burning and expanding in the void. The specter faced the sky and roared, extending its claws to strike over. It was truly like an erupting volcano, a pillar of turbid smoke and fire that smashed into the clouds. The mental plane trembled and swayed. The burning demonic claw, brimming with the desire to destroy, chased after the tail of Luo Nan's soul body. It crushed through several hundred layers of the curtain structure of the mental world to form a shadow behind Luo Nan. Luo Nan could already feel the breath of the Grim Reaper. However, the Grim Reaper's scythe was unable to hook onto its target in the end. Luo Nan didn't know just how deep he had dived into the mental plane. He only knew that the burning demonic claw had crushed through nearly 1,000 layers of curtains in succession before finally reaching its limit. No matter how much it ignited with its killing intent, burning through and warping the majority of the mental plane, it was ultimately unable to crash into the level of Luo Nan's soul body. It was just a little bit off, but it was still not enough. And in reality, the powerful attack missed. The dark red shadow completely disregarded the laws of matter. Its figure came to a halt like a steel nail, smashing into the clouds. It seized the position of Luo Nan's cloud aura silhouette and used malevolent eyes to stare fiercely at Luo Nan. What the hell was that? Luo Nan was both shocked and furious. His reaction to stress, just now, was truly extraordinary. It was all thanks to his soul body. If his fleshly body had come in, wouldn't he have been smashed into a meat patty just now? No, from the speed and strength of the attack just now, he would probably have been blasted into smithereens. He would have died without an intact corpse. It was fortunate that he hadn't encountered such a situation the last time he came in. Otherwise, today's matter wouldn't have happened. Right now, Luo Nan was like entering a wildlife sanctuary. He was sitting in a fully armed tour bus, separated by a layer of transparent glass. He was in close contact with a dangerous, ferocious beast. As for the ferocious beast, it was entrenched in the clouds, revealing its malevolent body. Its height should be between 5 to 7 meters. The reason why there was such a large discrepancy was because its body was crooked like an ape. Its forelimbs hung down, making it hard to judge. Chapter 383. The skin of the beast was dark red, and its bulging muscles were covered with a layer of fine scales. Its bald skull was wrapped in a thick layer of wrinkled skin. The top of its skull was deeply caved in, and its eyes bulged out. Its pupils were dark red, and its background was dark yellow. Its mouth and nose were almost indistinguishable, forming a circle of dark purple that looked like a paste. Saliva flowed from its mouth, making it ugly and ferocious. Just by looking at its appearance, there was no doubt that it was some kind of mutant species. It looked a little like a gibbon, but it was 100 times uglier. Luo didn't know whether or not this fellow belonged to the type of mutant that had already been discovered. In any case, he had no impression of it at all, so he gave it the name of mushed-mouth ape at the last minute. At this moment, the rotten-mouth ape was staring straight at him with its crimson eyes. It was clear that the enemy was able to lock onto Luo Nan's specific location on the mental plane, even though the enemy was unable to attack him. Just this point alone surpassed the vast majority of people Luo Nan had encountered. After about a minute, the mushmouth ape seemed to have grown tired of the pointless staring. Its strong body slowly sank and disappeared into the clouds. Its gaze never left Luo Nan's location until the very end. Its gaze was turbid, but it possessed the cruelty and greed of a predator. This made Luo Nan understand that this mushed-mouth ape was treating him as prey. It had no intention of giving up in the short term. As long as it grasped the opportunity to break through the isolation on the mental plane, it would slaughter its way over without the slightest hesitation. It would tear Luo Nan to pieces, then it would devour and digest him. Sometime later, Luo Nan's thoughts were verified. Sure enough, the mushed-mouth ape didn't leave. It maintained a high level of patience and intense desire. It constantly wandered around Luo Nan's surroundings, ready to make a move. Sometimes it really did launch an attack. Its tyrannical and overbearing attack pattern was able to exert pressure on Luo Nan even if its attacks failed. From this point alone, the mushed-mouth ape truly lived up to its name as a top predator. It was trying to turn a failed ambush into a marathon of death that tested its endurance and determination. Controlling his soul in the depths of the mental plane at all times to avoid the attack range of the mushed-mouth ape was indeed quite tiring. He had to use the cloak to interfere at all times, and the consumption of his soul power was considerable. But it needed to be emphasized once more. Luo Nin wasn't afraid of consumption. He wasn't afraid of consumption. He wasn't afraid of consumption. Important things must be repeated 3 times. It wasn't easy to move around in the depths of the mental plane. The current rate of soul power consumption had indeed surpassed the output of the production line, but only by a little. It was like the evaporation of seawater by the sun. Although the amount was considerable, compared to the total amount of seawater, the consumption was negligible in a short period of time. If Luo Nan wanted to, he could race this mush-mouth ape for several days and nights. They would see who would tire out first. However, Luo Nan didn't have any thoughts of torturing himself. He was even more unwilling to waste his precious time on a meaningless chase. After taking the opportunity to observe for half an hour, he sped up with all his might. With the astonishing flying speed of his soul body, he forcefully shook off the mushed-mouth ape's pursuit and regained his peace. Even though Luo Nan had gotten rid of the threat, he saw that the cloud region that Gear and the external neuron had guided him to had such a vicious being. This greatly exceeded Luo Nan's expectations. Luo Nan wasn't purely observing the mutant during the previous half hour of pursuit. He followed the scouting method he had just learned not too long ago. He circled around a temporarily set center, crossed and flew, and did his best to expand the range of his senses. He was unable to obtain an exact number at the moment, but he made a rough estimate. His soul body continued to expand outwards at high speeds. The cross-sectional area it covered probably exceeded 10,000 square kilometers. It was a vast airspace with a diameter of 100 kilometers. It was equal to the size of the core city area of Xia City. But not only did he not discover the limits of the cloud layer, even the top, bottom, and 4 directions became blurry in the end. Only one thing was clear. The mushed-mouth ape he encountered had appeared again and again in this airspace. He no longer had any thoughts of 2 or 3 kittens. Even though there were only a few of these valiant and tyrannical kittens in the 100-kilometer area, it was still too crowded for apex predators. They moved like lightning, and their range of activity was frighteningly large. Luo Nan tried to lock onto 2 of them. He only followed them for a few minutes before the targets jumped out of the limits of his senses. But at the same time, new mush-mouth apes leaped in. Last time, Luo Nan had only stayed here for a dozen or so seconds due to falling from a high altitude. He had avoided a direct confrontation with them. It was simply first-rate luck. Sigh. He seemed to have overlooked something. He needed to sort it out. First of all, his encounter in the atrium of Gear and the marvelous use of the external neuron proved that his mother, and that person, had come here back then. Second of all, regardless of his mother's fate, they had indeed escaped unscathed back then. Luo Nan made a rough estimate of the mushed-mouth ape's strength. Judging from its attack power alone, it should be above B rank, not yet A rank. And it seemed to live in groups. It could be said to be quite terrifying. There were a limited number of similar locations on Earth, and all of them were places where even extraordinaries had to take a detour. Did his parents already possess this level of strength back then? It was truly impossible to judge from the bits and pieces of information related to his mother in his memories. Luo Nan could not deny this possibility, but there were other explanations. For example, the cloud world back then wasn't this dangerous. This thought popped up in Luo Nan's mind because he noticed that only the mushed-mouth ape and the others flew through the cloud layer. They were extremely monotonous. According to his limited knowledge of ecology, this didn't make much sense. Even if they were mutants, they were still a type of living creature. They needed to survive at the very least, and eating was the most basic. The mushed-mouth ape did indeed possess a powerful desire to hunt, but the cloud layer environment was too monotonous. So far, Luo Nan had only discovered this type of living creature. There were no others. There were no other minerals or plants with high energy densities that could be ingested. The basic conditions for feeding them were not present. In addition, even though they maintained a distance from each other and maintained vigilance, Luo Nan couldn't see any intense desire to kill each other. Devouring each other and the like was not a normal option. Of course, Luo Nan considered the mushed-mouth ape to be a mutant, to be a living creature. If this thing was a fantasy breed that ate the wind and drank dew, a legendary demonic god, then Luo Nan would ignore what Luo Nan said. Was this the case? The possibility was very, very low. Luo Nan was temporarily unable to draw a life sketch for the mushed-mouth ape due to the interference of the powerful life magnetic field. However, the berserk and scorching life energy could not be faked, let alone the corporeal desire to hunt. All in all, Luo Nan concluded that these mushed-mouth apes were very likely affected by special factors. They had temporarily entered this area. For example, hunting prey. The mushed-mouth ape that had just killed Luo Nan not only possessed brilliant and skilled hunting techniques, but its choice of attack was also very appropriate. It hunted with caution and patience, as if it had practiced this frequently. Luo Nan drew a simple inference from this. They should have a target, at least in the near future. They were adept at roaming the mental plane. They very likely possessed the ability to interfere with the material world. They possessed a certain counterattack method. They had even caused a vicious mutant of B-rank strength to suffer a loss. They were mainly active in the cloud layer, but it was very likely that they had gone to other places and provoked a pile of trouble. All right, there must be a target. Luo Nan's chaotic thoughts finally became clear. But after becoming clear, his first thought was to slap himself in the face. If his guess was correct, he had personally thrown the target in. It was that snake tongue. That's right. He had hurriedly entered and exited the cloud layer through gear that day. Luo Nan still had Snake Tongue, who had suffered a backlash from the curse, in his hands. He didn't know how he had thrown Snake Tongue away, but he thought about it carefully. Indeed, it was most likely that he had thrown her here. If this was the case, Snake Tongue wouldn't have suffered a backlash from the Nightmare Vine spell while she was in a fugue state. She shouldn't have fallen to her death and been here for 10 days, right? Luo Nan was a layman when it came to the curse branch. But after that day, he did some understanding of Snake Tongue. He knew that this woman was one of the few curse experts of the inner world. Her mental state was extremely formidable. No matter how fierce the backlash from the curse was, it wouldn't be able to trap her for long. If he were to consider this line of thought, then the current situation would have a relatively clear explanation. Of course, this was pure conjecture. Perhaps his mind was obstructed and his train of thought was wrong, leading him in the opposite direction. But in any case, Luo Nan's current mood was showing signs of worsening. The joy and sense of accomplishment from overcoming countless difficulties and finally entering the cloud world had long since been scattered by the volcanic eruption of the mushed-mouth ape. But before he could sort things out, he thought about the matter with Snake Tongue. He thought about the great secret his mother had hidden for many years. He didn't even have a clue about the bizarre and wonderful cloud world, and he had been tossed about by a wandering soul for 10 days. What if some extremely valuable clue was destroyed by Snake Tongue? Or perhaps she deliberately hid it and spread it. What should he do? The more he thought, the more anxious he became. Luo Nan made a firm resolution to find Snake Tongue. If she was alive, he wanted to see her. If she was dead, he wanted to see her. Even if he was dead, he wanted to see convincing evidence. Luo Nan pondered for a moment and chose to follow a mushed-mouth ape. He would observe it for a long time before making a decision. But the stalking didn't go smoothly. Luo Nan's chosen target wasn't the one that had attacked him before. It was just a random choice. This fellow's body was a bit smaller, but it was just as valiant. Luo Nan was deep in the mental plane, exceeding the attack range of the mushed-mouth ape, but the ape still sensed him. The long stalking caused the target to react greatly. It turned around to chase and attack many times, but it was never able to touch Luo Nan's true body. It became extremely manic, constantly going in circles, refusing to cooperate. Luo Nan was annoyed, but he couldn't help but sigh in admiration at the same time. Such keen senses and the ability to suppress the material and mental planes at the same time were simply perfect methods in the domain that the mushed-mouth ape could reach. From the information obtained by the society, Extraordinaries were excluded from the various ability users due to the different nature of their abilities. For example, the format of Fire of the Burner could attack a Darksider species like the human-faced arachnid, but its destructive power was a bit weaker than in the material world. It wasn't like the mushed-mouth ape. Its destructive power was astonishing no matter what plane it was on, and there was no obvious loss in conversion. As for how it was used, how much experience could Luo Nin earn from observing it a few times? Even if Luo Nin wanted to copy it, it would be hard for him to do so. He could only drool at the mushed-mouth ape's methods. Time passed like this, second by second. Luo Nin knew that it would be hard to find any clues related to Snake Tongue if this continued. He was just about to change his train of thought when a strange feeling spread over from the other side of the void. Chapter 384. Luo Nan was certain that the connection between his soul body and fleshly body was still there even though he had moved through the void. It was just that the distortion was severe, weaker than it had ever been. He couldn't estimate the distance at all, and his perception of the details was also a problem. Luo Nan was a bit flustered when he sensed what was happening over there. He didn't care about anything else, but he was worried that his aunts would come home and see him lying on the bed like a corpse. They would send him directly to the hospital. Even though Luo Nan had 10,000 hopes of doing an in-depth exploration of the cloud world and ascertaining Snake Tongue's whereabouts early on, reality was right there. He still had to kneel. With a thought, in the empty center of the condensation ring structure, the new structure formed by the external neuron released a corresponding signal. The Soul Cloak's interference method changed, and in an instant, the world changed. In the depths of the clouds, the messy tail ape, who had been teased for a long time, was still in a rage. The threat that had troubled it for a long time had suddenly disappeared without a trace, as if it had never appeared. The mush-tail ape had a stupefied expression, and it circled around on the spot a few more times before leaving resentfully. Luo Nin had already returned to the normal world. It was a familiar place. Just like last time, it was still in the tree hole of the withered tree sandbar, a kilometer away from Gear's main building. Sure enough, there was a clear pattern for entering and exiting the cloud world. It was set up intentionally. Luo Nin was both shocked and impressed by his mother's design back in the day. Unfortunately, he was unfilial as a son. He had casually thrown out a piece of trash and caused trouble. At this moment, the connection between the soul and the physical body was much clearer. Luo Nin also knew that it was a false alarm. It wasn't that his aunt and uncle had returned. Instead, it was his wristband vibrating to alert him that someone was contacting him. However, if uncle and aunt called, it would also be a headache. The wristband was not like the Hexaear. It did not have the ability to listen to call from a distance of 80 kilometers. Luo Nin knew that he had to go back. He reluctantly circled around the tree hole, flew into the air, and sensed Gear from afar. Only then did he flee into the air. On the way back, Luo Nin once again set a new record for the speed of his soul body, traveling 80 kilometers in just 4 minutes. This was equivalent to a speed of 1,200 kilometers per hour. It was already infinitely close to the speed of sound. Actually, it wasn't impossible to reach the speed of sound. It was just that Luo Nin didn't know what sort of state the external neuron would be in when it broke through the sound barrier. It was better to be cautious and experiment when he had free time in the future. Luo Nin anxiously looked at his wristband when he got home. He conveniently returned his soul to his body. When his body and soul became one, he finally realized what was going on. External neuron. Just as he thought about it, he realized that the external neuron had returned to the depths of his brain and transformed into its original form of a long electric line. It circled around and formed the carrier of the divine wheel structure, supporting the iceberg-like soul energy. Quite the initiative. If the structure of the condensation ring came in, Luo Nan shook his head in a hurry. He gave up on the standard idea that water had gotten into his brain. He got up and stretched his neck to look at the caller ID on his wristband. He definitely wouldn't be able to pick up the first call. Later on, the person called twice more before stopping. But luckily, it wasn't the uncle and aunt that Luo Nin was most worried about. It was an unexpected acquaintance. Luo Nin blinked. It was actually Emo Han, Sister Pomegranate, who was ranked 16th in the younger generation of his uncle's family. Filled with doubts, he dialed the number back. The call was quickly picked up. The person on the other side said hello twice, and the surroundings seemed to be very noisy. "Sure. Sister Han, I was taking a shower just now, so I took off my bracelet. Is something the matter?" Luo Nin forcefully pushed the dangerous words back into his mouth. He blurted out a lie and assumed an obedient posture. Emo Han switched the ambient mode, and her voice soon became clear. She was in a good mood. She didn't care whether Luo Nan's reason was true or false. She laughed and said, "I just confirmed it with Pung 17. I'll be there at 7 o'clock sharp tomorrow night. Little Nanster, prepare to receive me." Tomorrow? Isn't it tomorrow? F***CK. He forgot that there was still a torment. Luo Nin opened his mouth, but the words of refusal didn't leave his mouth in the end. Emo Han was a lively and straightforward girl. There were only a few people of the same age in the Emo family who truly treated Luo Nan as a younger brother. After the incident at Frost River Reality, Emo Han even made a special trip to the hospital to visit him. Speaking of which, didn't this sister feel any lingering fear last time at Frost River Reality? That's right. Their group of people had been brought back to the police station early on. The impression they left behind was just a group fight. As for the situation in the news report, it was mostly separated by a layer. In this way, Luo Nan was the one with a shadow in his heart. Luo Nan ended the call with Emo Han with absurd emotions. He turned his hand and called Emo Pung. The moment the call connected, Luo Nan bluntly asked, "What the hell is with this constantly expanding team?" Emo Pung was yelling, "Do you think I'm happy? It's clearly a get-together. Isn't Shirlu helping her family by going there? So hurry up and find someone. Find a fierce and handsome guy to bewitch her. Don't ruin our brother's plan. Plan your sister." "I don't have a sister. Go find my sister." Luo Nan thought of Emoya, who was about to embark on her return trip. He immediately shivered and said unhappily, "Just how many people are you bringing? Which idiot leaked the information?" I admit it." Luo Nan was so stupid that he cried. He simply hung up. Luo Nan looked at the time again. His aunt and uncle could come back at any time. It was no longer suitable for his out-of-body state. He could only wait until nightfall to discuss it. His soul body withdrew, but Luo Nan's mind was still spinning in circles above the clouds. He diligently pondered on how to detect the shape of the sky over there as soon as possible. He wanted to find Snake Tongue's whereabouts, but he didn't have a clue for a time. After thinking for a long time, he changed his angle. He remembered that there was still a very crucial question. Where in the world was the region above the clouds? Boundless, thick clouds that defied common sense. Burning, bloody light flowed between the gaps in the clouds. The powerful mushed-mouth ape flew here and there. Each element was extremely distinctive, but when gathered together, it was like a casually drawn demonic face. It was hard to distinguish. The reason for this was that the elements that formed the demonic face were somewhat contrary to the logic of reality. Luo Nan was even thinking that this wasn't some place on Earth, but a fantasy land. Luo Nan put aside his fantasy thoughts for now. He needed to consider the problem from a practical and measurable perspective. He didn't consider the thick clouds for now. He didn't care about the source of the bloody light. He just started with the mushed-mouth ape that he had observed for the longest time. The mushed-mouth ape should be a type of mutant, without a doubt. It had gregarious tendencies and powerful strength. According to the knowledge he had learned, high-level mutants had quite a strong sense of territory. Only a small portion of the mutants resided in large groups, and the area was relatively fixed. If Luo Nan was able to investigate its species, there was a high chance that he could determine where on Earth this world was. Luo Nan gave it a try. He transformed the image of this monster into a mental signal and searched on the psychic wave network, but he didn't find anything. Clearly, relevant information didn't exist in the public information. He once again had the idea of obtaining classified information. This was a bit more troublesome. Right now, the Xia City branch's secrecy system was being implemented step by step. Anyone who wished to access classified information and utilize related resources needed to apply for access privileges. The threshold wasn't high aside from a very small portion of special information. However, access records would be left behind for future tracing. It was said that the secret level of the database was sealed off in passing after the branch exchanged large amounts of information with the military. Yuan's work was certainly involved in this. No matter what other people said, she was modifying the behavior of the ability users of Xia City bit by bit. Luo Nan first subconsciously applied for an intelligent search service, but he suddenly reacted and chose to cancel it. This was a bit of selfishness. He didn't want to expose too much information regarding the cloud world. He hadn't even figured out his mother's inheritance, yet he wanted everyone to know about it. What was the point of this? The more he wanted to protect his food, the more Snake Tongue's existence was a thorn in Luo Nan's heart. He needed to find that female ghost as soon as possible no matter what. Luo Nan nearly wanted to kill his way to gear, but he was still rational. He knew that he couldn't cause any new problems before dinner, so he forcefully suppressed the urge. He needed to adjust his state of mind. He thought for a bit and took advantage of the time he was applying for access privileges to the database to borrow the Mutant Species Encyclopedia, Inner World Edition, and some other video and text materials related to mutants. He also pulled up the video materials from last year's intermediate training class, supplementing the handouts and notes Papercut had sent him. He needed to act like an obedient child at home before dinner. Using the precise and nimble dripping sword to pass the time was just right. Luo Nan didn't deny that he had a very special feeling toward the dripping sword. Not to mention the dripping sword's own effects. The structure of the condensation ring had truly made a great contribution. It drew in the external neuron to form a central structure that transformed interference power, thus forming a soul cloak. It could freely choose the direction of interference on the mental or material plane, freeing Luo Nan from his weak and frail body. Needless to say, Luo Nan would owe this favor when he entered the cloud world. Once a person developed a sense of intimacy toward a certain skill, they would possess an abundant driving force. At first, Luo Nan just wanted to pass the time, but when he truly began to research, his standards unconsciously rose higher. Not only did he need to improve upon the core structure of the condensation ring, but he also needed to carefully ponder over several auxiliary structures. Speaking of which, he was quite curious. The condensation ring had undergone a body rebirth with the external neuron. Could auxiliary structures be added to it? If so, what state would it be, and what effects would it have? With a single thought, Luo Nan simply went into an out-of-body state. With just a slight thought, the condensation ring structure appeared from the nothingness of his consciousness. It was engraved in the void, and the external neuron seemed to possess intelligence. It sprang out at the same time, following the relevant structure to take shape. Since the process was extremely short, Luo Nan couldn't tell whether or not his consciousness had directly controlled the external neuron to form the condensation ring. Also, he could faintly feel a tiny point in the hollow structure of the condensation ring. This was the key structure that opened the door to the cloud world in the atrium of gear, affected by the cyclotron acceleration. Whoa, it even has a memory function. Luo Nan was truly convinced. The structure at the center of the condensation ring was already below the nanometer scale. It was impossible for Luo Nan to study it with his current abilities. His mind rippled a few times, and he returned to practicing with the dripping sword. He first experimented. He assembled the three auxiliary structures, the guidance, the amplification, and the acceleration, in a probing manner. In the structural design of the dripping sword, the amplification structure was a stabilizer. It ensured the continuity and stability of the long-distance effects of soul strength. The acceleration structure was like the nitrogen-oxygen acceleration system of a modified car. It was responsible for explosive acceleration in a short period of time. On the other hand, the guidance structure was used in micro-operations to increase the sensitivity of operations. These three structures complemented each other with the basic condensation ring. Every time a structure was superimposed, its controllability and explosive power would increase. As for the sharpening and rupturing structures, they belonged to the attack modules. They were mainly used on the condensed water beads. Luo Nen had yet to try them out. Luo Nan was actually quite worried that the condensation ring, after undergoing a body rebirth, would reject the other auxiliary structures. Therefore, he placed them very carefully. The early stages were pretty good. The new version of the condensation ring accepted several auxiliary structures very generously. Though there were differences between the real and the virtual, the control was quite smooth. Luo Nan was just about to be happy when he saw the condensation ring split into lightning. The lightning leaped into the 3 auxiliary structures. The auxiliary structures didn't even circulate for half a circle before they collapsed one after another. It was hard to support them. Luo Nan didn't feel defeated when facing this scene. He just felt that it was a bit familiar. Wasn't this the situation when the external neuron and the condensation ring were connected? Luo Nan thought about the tiny structure at the center of the condensation ring. Could it be that the new version of the condensation ring had the spare power to perform a body rebirth on the other auxiliary structures? Luo Nan carefully sensed the entire process of the auxiliary structures collapsing. He knew that he couldn't let the external neuron take the blame. In fact, he had learned the auxiliary structures quickly. They weren't polished like the condensation ring. The structures were too rough, and they weren't stable enough. The lightning was uniform, and there was air leaking in all directions. There was no value in using them as a reference for reconstruction. In other words, he needed to meticulously sculpt the auxiliary structures and dress them up beautifully in order to gain the favor of the external neuron. What the hell? Ridicule was ridicule, but Luo Nan was still looking forward to it. This precise and exquisite painting style was very much in line with his aesthetic standards. And if he could really do it, wouldn't it be a dripping sword structure completely forged from the external neuron? Metal. Actually, Luo Nan didn't know if the external neuron's peculiar material could be considered metal. But the flexible and tough combination of material molding was perhaps the sword pill of novels. When the time came for him to use it against an enemy, the enemy would think it was a bead of water, but it was actually a solid particle. Its penetrative power and lethality would increase by 10-fold or 100-fold. That would be fun. He needed to think about it a bit more. The external neuron was such a precious thing. If he were to toss it out like a hidden weapon and it was taken away by some powerhouse, he would be better off dead. Luo Nan began a new practice amidst this tangled mood. The 5 auxiliary structures were far inferior to the condensation ring in terms of complexity. But he still needed a lot of painstaking practice in order to reach the level of refinement and precision. Luo Nan was smarter or luckier than the others. He was the first to create a blue or purple level condensation ring. He had a reference template and a standard. Luo Nan attracted the external neuron to undergo a rebirth. It was tantamount to having an indestructible carrier and testing instrument. Any of the auxiliary structures that lacked precision would not be able to pass the threshold of Luo Nan's subconscious. Even if he managed to fool it, the external neuron would feel that the quality of the harem wasn't good. Electricity would burst forth, and any defective product would immediately disintegrate. This was another torturous process. Luo Nan had just wanted to kill time before dinner, but he never expected that he would spend the next 4 or 5 hours on these auxiliary structures. He had no choice. When a person's brain became excited and their concentration increased, it was not easy to reverse their direction. Chapter 385. Luo Nan's mind wasn't too good the next day. He sat in the classroom, his mind dispirited most of the time. His mind was blank during class. Not a single bit of what the teacher said entered his ears. Shuele only met up with him before the 3rd class. He was shocked to see Luo Nan's condition. "You broke your training?" "I stayed up late." Luo Nan's answer was concise and clear. He had been practicing the dripping sword until midnight yesterday. After the night class, he couldn't help but go into an out-of-body state. He crossed half the city and entered the cloud world from gear. He continued his search, constantly familiarizing himself with the environment. His search yielded no results, but he didn't sleep the entire night. His mind was dispirited from going back and forth. Shuele was a clever person. His first reaction was, "Did you miss your morning and evening classes?" "Nope." Luonan rolled his eyes and yawned. Shuele spoke very seriously. "It's about the same even if you didn't miss it. Blood and energy are nourished and consumed during training. It's very complicated. Your way of playing is like lighting a lamp and boiling oil. The effects are halved. Then what should I do? How about I sleep for a bit during class, and you help me keep an eye on things?" "That's fine too." Luonan reached out to poke him. "Bad friend." Luonan buried his head in the crook of his arm before Shuele could retort. He fell asleep in the span of 2 or 3 breaths. To be honest, although he hadn't left the house for the past 2 days, he had experienced too many changes, absorbed too much information, and learned too many things. His brain had reached its limit, and he really couldn't take it anymore. In any case, this was a public class. The enormous lecture hall was the best cover. A few possibilities flashed through Luonan's mind before he fell asleep. For example, Shuele calling him, Peony calling him to begin the search mission, the society calling him, and so on. But things were hard to predict. What truly woke him up from his dreams wasn't any of these factors. It was a stimulation that came from the mental plane. It came from a position that seemed very close, but he couldn't grasp it. The Wraith sign? Luonan's thoughts captured the most crucial factor. But before he could truly sort out the clues, a scorching and explosive feeling suddenly exploded. It followed the incorporeal connection on the mental plane and came rumbling, shaking the God Wheel. The situation was simply like a meteorite falling from the heavens. It smashed into a vast ocean of glaciers. The God Wheel shook for a moment, and the surging and abundant soul strength created waves. It instantly formed a dozen or so tides that came crashing down. Ow! Luonan was really caught off guard. The God Wheel frame, constructed from the external neuron, was stable, but the feeling of pain and danger was real. He screamed. His body tensed up, and his entire body. His knee hit the bottom of the table, and the tables and chairs in the lecture hall were fixed. A muffled sound rang out, and Luonan's entire body bent like a prawn. He hugged his knees and sat down. Shuele was shocked to the side. The first thing he did after coming to his senses was to throw his entire body over to protect Luonan. He believed that Luonan had suffered an assassination attempt from headquarters or some other power. He wanted to prevent Luonan from suffering a second injury. The classroom was silent for a moment, and then the lecturer on the podium said coldly, "What are you doing?" In the next 3 seconds, the classroom went from buzzing to roaring laughter, and the discipline in the classroom instantly collapsed. As one of the best educational institutions in Xia City, Acumen College had never been a place where one could spend their days leisurely. Although they didn't go as far as to implement some sort of militarized classroom discipline, there were naturally conduct points and strict examinations to punish students who caused trouble in class. Luonan had shaken the entire lecture theater to the point of buzzing. Shuele had directly pounced on Luonan with the weight of MT Tai. If Luonan didn't raise his blade and make an example out of Shuele, he would be letting down the class time system. The lecturer on the lectern was a middle-aged woman in her 40s or 50s. Her facial features were quite good-natured, but her expression had turned cold and hard after receiving such a torment from Luonan and Shuele. "Get up, I'm fine." Luonan struggled to break free from Shuele's oppression. He endured the pain in his knees with great difficulty, and when he straightened up, he saw this scene. He was already exhausted to begin with, and his reaction was much worse than usual. He was even more sluggish, and he could only display a stupefied expression, unable to do anything. Shuele was about the same to the side. He still hadn't switched out from his bodyguard identity. Right at this moment, the young female teaching assistant, who was a support staff member, walked over to the lecturer's side. She said something in a soft voice. The middle-aged female lecturer's anger was suppressed, and she spoke coldly. "Students, please stand up." Luonan and Shuele glanced at each other, and they obediently stood up. "What are your names?" Luonan and Shuele had already accepted their fate. They lowered their heads and said their names, but they were a bit vague. The female lecturer didn't care. She just said, "Students, if any one of you isn't feeling well, you can go to the infirmary and get treated as soon as possible. Don't disturb the other students in class." "Yes, yes. He's having hysteria. I'll immediately take him," Shuai reacted, and he directly made Luo Nan into a mental patient. He made a supporting gesture, and he supported Luo Nan as they walked down step by step amidst the chaotic laughter of the students. Luo Nan's knee was injured, and he really was limping. The two were like this. They didn't dare to raise their heads, and they cut a sorry figure as they left the classroom. Luo Nan's absent-minded mind recovered a bit just before they left the room. He noticed one thing. The young female teaching assistant who had persuaded the lecturer was actually someone he knew. Tianci. They hadn't contacted each other since the incident at Ocean Sky, Cloud City. Presumably, Tianci needed quite a long period of time to sort out her emotions. But he never expected that they would meet again in such a manner. Luo Nan didn't feel comfortable saying hello, so he left in a hurry with Shuai. But the bell rang before the elevator even reached the bottom floor. Luo Nan only found out after asking Shuai that it was the last class of the morning. This fact hurt Luo Nan quite a bit. Things wouldn't have escalated to this extent if he had been a few minutes late. His wristband vibrated at this time, and the name of the contact appeared. Luo Nan rushed to pick up the phone. "Senior Sister Tian, thanks for just now." The caller was none other than Tianci. Her tone was gentle and calm, just like a friend she often interacted with. "It's nothing. Teacher Wu has a very good heart. She asked for your name, and she didn't scan it through the class system. That means that she wants you to open up. Otherwise, it would be hard to avoid deducting conduct points. That's all thanks to Senior Sister Tian's help. I'll treat you to a meal later." Luo Nan spoke in passing, and he suddenly felt that these words were very familiar. It seemed that he had said these words more than once in the past few days. Actually, this was normal. As his social range expanded, his interpersonal relationships gradually became more complex. It was hard to avoid social interactions. What other words could it be if he didn't say these words?